Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a new and an interesting, hopefully, stream that I've set up. We're going to be going through this evening article called "The Rise and Fall of Science." The author is escaping me. I know his first name is Sean, but that's about it. And then I'm also joined this evening by Aydin Paladin. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No, fantastic. Obviously, for those people who are not necessarily in the know, could you let them know basically who you are, what you do? I've obviously got your links in the little box below, so if people want to search you out afterwards, then there's that.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Aydin Paladin. I'm a YouTuber. I focus primarily on the intersection of social science and politics in the videos that I make, and pop culture, I guess, to a lesser degree, and a more fun degree. But I have a background, a bachelor's degrees in communications and psychology, and then I have a master's degree in communication with an emphasis on media psychology and intergroup interactions. And I was a PhD student. I am going back to finish that, but that was on hold for a while. So I've done a lot of research myself. I read research every day. It's my absolute passion. So that's why I found this Rise and Fall of Science article really interesting to take a look at.
What you're actually saying there is you're an addict and you can't actually stop reading journal articles.
I 100%. It actually makes my day better every time. I love reading. Love it.
I enjoy reading articles, but I would never say that. I don't know if I could go so far as to say it makes my life worth living to go that far, but yeah,
maybe it is an addiction because it absolutely. If I I guess this would be a question too, because the thing that I love most, and I think we can get more into this later in this article in particular, parts of it, is that if I am expecting something, which I have good reasons to expect something in a scientific study in the social sciences, because I've been doing this for 10 years. I have a good reason to form a hypothesis in a direction. If I find something in a study that goes against the direction of my hypothesis, or fails to reject the null most incredibly, that does make my day brighter, because it's like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. It's like a surprise. It's a pleasant surprise of finding out something new when you had every sort of logical reason to expect to know what to expect a certain outcome and not find it.
So you're saying that you're going to take great pleasure in writing the first line of your discussion as contrary to the findings of previous research, comma.
It's the best. And again, nulls, failing to reject the null. That actually is my favorite. And the reason why that's my favorite.
For people who don't know, when she says rejecting the null hypothesis is that your variables are unrelated to one another. And when you reject the null hypothesis, you're saying they are related in some way. I'm getting that right.
Pretty much every study, yes, and pretty much every study that you will find published rejects the null. Because it means that there's no relationship, essentially. Not just that the relationship was in the opposite direction, but these two things just are not related to one another.
It is neither a positive nor negative relationship. It is a lack thereof of any relationship.
And why that's fascinating, and why that's the most exciting thing to me, is that there's something called the file drawer effect. Are you aware of this?
No, do tell.
So the file drawer effect is that in science, but particularly the social sciences, but I'm sure it's in every science, that's just the one I know the most about, is that scientists conduct research all the time that does not get published because of what I just said. Usually they fail to reject the null. They can't, it's just like it was a failed study. What happens is all that data goes into a file drawer and it's just locked away. It's actually really important that should be published. Saying I checked and these two things are not related should be published, but it's not. And in fact, low effect sizes are not published oftentimes. Finding an oppositional effect, what you anticipated sometimes is rejected, depending on how honest the researcher is. Because guess what? You're supposed to state your hypothesis and follow through with it. And if you didn't find it, you're just supposed to say, well, you found the opposite of the hypothesis. You're not supposed to go back in and then change your hypothesis. But
you are not to mess around. In fact, one of the big things when you're going through ethics selections is you end up with, I am going to run this particular set of analyses as well, and if when you actually collect your data another set of analyses would work better, you can't change it usually without redoing the entire study. You can usually reuse the same data set, but you have to resubmit all of the ethics again, and it's just an absolute nightmare.
Supposed to start from scratch. You can use the same data. This sounds pedantic because it is, but it's like drilled into you in the ethics courses, which is, you can use the same data, but you now have to start over from scratch in terms of how you assess it to try and reduce bias, because bias is such an issue.
Academia being petty? Surely not. I've never in all my years in the field come across pettiness in psychology. No. Don't be ridiculous.
Absolutely not.
But yes, so Chat has pointed out that this is Sean Last is the author of this particular article. It's quite an interesting one. It's fairly long.
Oh, yeah. Now I can tell this is Sean.
Yeah,
I didn't have the name on it. Yeah. Okay.
So makes sense.
I really like Sean.
I am gonna pop on. Hopefully, this makes sense and appears on screen. Yes. So I've got my nicely clipped thing, so everyone can read along at home if they want to. If they want to read along and we're labouring over a point you want to catch up and go ahead, I have linked the article in the show notes below as well, so you've got no excuses and that side of things. And thank you, Sitskoen, for chucking us 50 Danish kroner and saying, you're 45 seconds late, your lateness is noted, at least it's unlikely that Aydin will fall asleep this time, much less twice.
It's important to be late and gay, and I'm at least half gay, so requirements met.
If there's one reason this stream ends up getting taken down, it's not for any controversial content within the actual article, but that Aydin made a homophobic comment somehow.
How can I be homophobic if I'm half gay? It's impossible. It's just like you can't be a racist if you're black. Come on.
Oh,
that's
I see.
Fair.
It's a bit like bisexual privilege. I don't know.
Actually, I could talk about that. Bisexual people are the black sheep of the LGBT community. They hate bisexuals.
How many times do I have to hear, make up your mind, from people who do this? Dear. Okay, so the rise and fall of science is the article. I'm going to read through it and we'll stop as we go along. I've not done anything like this before. If it ends up being terribly dull, we can jump to sort of points to points as we go through, and hopefully
there's one rather large grammatical error, but it's far enough down. I will not point it out.
No, I think I know the one you're talking about. We'll get there. So, in this post, the author will argue that scientific progress has significantly slowed over the last century, both at a per scientist and an absolute level, and then speculate, which is what we're interested in, about why this might have occurred. And that's where the real pith of the thing comes in, but we'll obviously be interpreting his sources and so on as we go through. So, first things first, on measuring scientific progress. And do feel free to just interrupt me at any point, Aydin, and we'll go off onto a tangent. So, to begin with, it is necessary to make clear how we go about measuring scientific progress. Broadly speaking, there are two ways of quantitatively measuring this construct. Quantitatively just means using numbers, to anyone who's unfamiliar. First, there is the subjective approach. This approach measures scientific progress during a time period by counting up the number of important events which occurred during that period, or the number of important people who lived and made achievements. What events and which people are important is determined by relevant experts, which can be measured in a variety of ways. You can analyse the frequency with which individuals or works are cited within expert material. You can ask the experts to rate a list of potentially significant figures or events. You can analyse the frequency with which individuals are included in encyclopedias, or the amount of space they are given within such works, etc. This approach doesn't work if the experts don't agree on the events and people which were important, but as it turns out, there is a high degree of consensus between experts in a wide variety of fields. And yes,
I'm gonna jump in here real quick. I think one of the reasons that he may find that his findings might make sense is to deal with that last statement. I don't think there is academic consensus much anymore because everything has become so hyper politicized. Something I would bring up is there's been a really big debate that's gone on for years in media psychology about do games cause violence, and there's been a back and forth between two groups of scholars, and I have a definitive opinion, and I think one group of scholars is correct and the other is not. But they have conducted meta-analyses. So in terms of, these are two major university level groups of each comprised of maybe 8 to 10 scholars who completely disagree. And it has been going on for 20 years.
Yeah. So similarly, I mean, one of the things that I've noted, I mean, any undergraduate humanities student will tell you that basically there's been the debate between socialization and genetics within the humanities for, well, really since its inception, and it goes back and forth, and usually there's one dominant paradigm. Behaviorism is the most one of the early ones that comes to mind, right? The idea that everything should be defined in terms of behavior and a lot of stimulus response stuff. But what ends up happening is that over time, one paradigm falls out of favour, the other one comes in. It also has its time in the limelight, and by the end, we're left with people going, well, actually, it's somewhere in the middle between these, if indeed a third, which isn't even further somewhere else, has been developed. And that between these two extremes, so in this case, sort of John Locke's tabula rasa, and everything is due to socialization, and on the other side, kind of the natural selection, sort of heavy evolutionary side of things, that everything is determined by genetics, not to mention even the determinists who are also getting in there and going, events theory and stuff like that. But the most academics say, well, actually it's somewhere in the middle of these two perspectives now, but of course that doesn't mean that there's a consensus on that, because everyone disagrees by how much and which topics are, at certain points along the scale, right? So,
right, and I've seen everything from, I would say it's about 60 to 70% genetic, and 30 to 40% environment in the best circumstances. There are some circumstances where environment makes up a lot more, but that's part of the problem or the issue or concern, I guess, as to why there's no consensus on the specific breakdown of what level the things in your life are deterministic by genetics and what degree it's determined by environment. And also, I just want to bring up the games study stuff. That's Ferguson et al. And Anderson et al. And if you want to read what I can only describe as an academic rap battle that's been going on for 20 years, read Anderson et al. And Ferguson et al. Back and forth. That's what it is. They are so rude to each other, particularly Anderson's cohort are viciously mean. They just say mean stuff about Ferguson, and then Ferguson claps back with snarky remarks, I'd say. I've never read anything else like it in academia, in modern academia.
And if you are an academic as well, you can pick up on the snark so easily.
Because nothing else is written like that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things was one of my individual differences lecturers was a lady called Jana Uher, who has done a lot of interesting studies, primarily with bonobo monkeys, actually. But she has this huge thing. Basically, she studied psychometrics because she hated psychometrics, and it comes across so much in all of her literature, just how much she hates factor analysis, and it's just
issues with factor analysis. Yeah,
and in fact, I don't even think that it is that she hates factor analysis, but she thinks that it's gone so far beyond its remit, especially the trait psychologists So, getting these people, and she's going, you're saying it's openness, but that's just a label that you're putting on it, etc., etc. So she's very anti all that. But the snark that comes across in the academic language in her paper is undeniable, but you wouldn't necessarily pick up on it unless you had read, the back and forth.
1,000 other papers you wouldn't be able to pick up, and that's unfortunate because, like, the Anderson-Ferguson thing, for example, and I haven't read this, but you have to send me the citation on it, I guess, because that sounds hilarious. But you have to have read so much academic literature for that kind of snark to come through. Sorry, I got derailed there, but I think that is part of the thing, is that there is not consensus to the degree that there once was. And then, the nature v nurture argument, the games and violence thing is one that I always come back to, because it is, for whatever reason, it gets brought up every year. Games caused something else this year. No, I don't think so. But okay. But see,
that would be
there's
like,
no consensus.
I
think
it would just be like saying women's, the violence of women is entirely predicated on E.L. James novels. Do you know? Right? Like detective novels, or women's consistent watching of like true crime drama.
Women do love true crime. I think. I mean, I do. I know a lot of women who do. But media affects stuff. There's so much research on it. I don't want to go off into more of a tangent than I already have. Media does not cause anything. That's the short and dirty. That's Ferguson.
Yeah, I mean
argument.
It comes down as much as anything to directional relationships anyway. It's like there was that kid who I think was quite mentally ill, very sort of distant family as well, and he just became obsessed with the show Dexter. You know Dexter, the one about the psychopath.
I thought you were going to talk about the guy who got obsessed with Danny Phantom, and he killed a bunch of people too.
I don't remember that one, but that
was a couple. What was his name? I don't remember, but sorry. But anyway, one thing I don't remember his name actually.
Probably. But there's this kid. He was obsessed with Dexter. He invited another girl at his school round who felt sorry for him, and he ended up hacking her up. And it caused a big debate at the time, about why we enjoy these shows and whether or not we should be able to watch them, and also whether or not they caused this child who should not have been watching it because he was under 18, which is another interesting arbitrary marker that we use, and whether or not we should ban such things from television. And you're just going, like, are you serious? Like, we have absolutely no evidence here for the direction of this relationship whatsoever. Did he watch watching Dexter make him disturbed, or was he disturbed and therefore wanted to watch Dexter? There's so much stuff.
There's a big ethical issue there as to why we don't know the answer to that question. So the ethical issue is that if we had any reason, let alone the many, many supposed scholars and real scholars, I'm sorry, I'm being dismissive because I find the video games cause violence thing absurd, but if we have reason to believe that a stimuli will result, and particularly repeated exposure to a stimuli will cause negative psychological effects, then it would be unethical to intentionally expose someone to that. And it's unethical to have any way of measuring the outcome, right?
Yeah.
So all we can look at is correlation. The best stuff that we have within the video games and violence research, for example, which is why it's so embarrassing, is they cannot measure violence as a result of exposure to violent video games. They can only measure basically annoyance. So the way that all these studies that have tried to understand the relationship between video games and violence are actually measuring aggression, and aggression is measured and operationalized by doing things like playing a loud, annoying noise in someone's ear. Excuse me, that is not the same as shooting up a school. It's just not. These are different constructs.
And they don't trust self-reports, so of course a lot of the time they're using physiological measures, and so what ends up being is like arousal is basically substituted for whatever particular emotion that they think that you're feeling at the time. God forbid we should even bring in the kind of implicit stuff, which IAT and stuff like that, which is its own kettle of fish, and
a lot of issues. IAT is a whole rabbit hole,
and
of
probably deserves
issues.
its own video. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, this is a total sidetrack.
No, not at all. We have managed to get through 3 paragraphs so far, so that's good. Okay, so basically he says there's a high degree of consensus between experts in a wide variety of fields. We disagree with that, clearly, a little bit. It's also interesting to note...
The reason, just to restate, sorry,
Yeah.
is that the reason why it might have gone down over time, the idea that there's these specific people that are the scientists, the geniuses of the age, which is Sean's argument here, that's decreased. There are fewer geniuses, essentially.
Yeah.
It might be because there just isn't consensus on anything anymore in the sciences. I think that's just to couch it, sorry, in that, to be specific.
The sky is blue is met with the sky is blue is met with the counter question, at what time of day?
Right.
And how blue? So he's
How do you define blue?
So he's used two sources here, Isaac 95 and Murray 03, which have decent, if I'm honest, reliability coefficients.
They do, but they're highly criticized papers.
But these 2 papers in particular, I mean, they're books, really, are
books.
quite significantly. Murray's one is Murray's one is Human Accomplishment. That's the book, which is almost as controversial as the bell curve. I don't know if it's necessarily quite as controversial as that, but
the bell curve is controversial. I mean, both Einstein and Murray, I think, are criticized for maybe the wrong reasons. Their work is devalued because of the implications of it. We mentioned this a bit beforehand.
Yeah. Just to quickly, they're criticized because their work has been taken by people deemed unsavory by certain political positions, and then that means that the work itself is, it doesn't matter if it's true. It's evil because it's been used by, it's been recommended by these people we don't like. And
a big mean Nazi man with a swastika tattoo cited one of these papers in his blog, and I do not mean Sean Last, but you know what I mean. Cited one of these papers in his blog. Therefore, the research is invalid, and that's ridiculous. It's not just guilt by association; it is degrading to the research. And Einstein maybe more than Murray, but Murray certainly over the bell curve has been dragged through the ringer, essentially.
Yes.
For no legitimate reason, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think so. Although it's been a long time since I've engaged with the whole bell curve thing, so I can't really comment further than that on that. So,
it upsets people's sensibilities, is what it does.
And we're not. We're not dismissing this on the basis of, the basis of it's controversial, therefore bad. It's more of just a side criticism that neither of us has observed anything remotely close to consensus in the disciplines. I think when it comes to the people who have the people who have made these great innovations as well, history is quite unforgiving. So if you think, I couldn't say to you, who was the most influential theorist from 1845 or something like that. You just don't. You don't know.
I would have no idea.
You have no idea, right? Whereas the things that people know about are the things that people are taught about in a historical context, and then when they're building the next stage in history, there are people who are pioneers in their own fields across this. He's reduced the fields here to I think it's 9 fields.
Natural science.
Yeah, natural sciences.
It's four main ones. Let me go scroll down to find it because it's in one of them. Then where was it? Shoot. Wasn't this close to the end?
Chat's asking.
There's one where I didn't. Oh yeah. Medicine, natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities.
There we go. And there's arts in there as well, I think, from a couple of...
Art, yeah. Arts is another one that... Yeah.
So it is...
It's sort of like, I think, counter to the hard, quote-unquote sciences, right?
The chat's asking us to get Jordan Peterson on to come and discuss this with us. I'm like, sure. He's welcome to come on if he answers my DMs, you know?
If only. It'd be interesting. I know a lot of people who know Dr. Peterson, like in my real life shit.
Yeah,
but I don't know if I have. No way I have that connection anymore.
I have one degree of separation here as well, and yet,
right.
So very strange. So, what I'm saying, chat, is it's not beyond the realms of possibility. You just have to wait and hope, just like all of us. Okay. So he basically says there's a subjective approach. So here's the quote unquote expert opinion, and he's drawing from these two primary sources. The other option is an objective approach. I'm not going to read this word for word, but I'll just explain it as we go along. And it basically says you can look at other metrics. So for instance, if you're looking at the impact of the invention of electricity on field crops, you would have to look at crop yield, and you would also have to look at a few other different bits and pieces, but this is quite reductive and relies on understanding all of your different confounds, so other technologies that come in, yes, and stuff that you need to research, and
these are correlational level data that can't be directly linked to one another via something more robust, like a regression analysis. Something that can show this causes that.
Absolutely, and like most things in this case as well, it's all completely quasi-experimental or non-experimental. Mm-hmm. So it's not even right. There's no causational stuff that you can really find. Okay, so turning
you can't do causal post hoc.
yeah. So turning to such trends, Murray's 03 book tracks the frequency of significant figures or individuals who made great contributions to knowledge up to 1950. As can be seen, a decline in the frequency of such individuals began in the late 19th century. Now, it's basically the conflicting... the graph shows... I'm hoping you've got the article up as well here, Aydin. The conflicting stories told by the count of significant figures and the rate of accomplishment. So, from what I can see here, the rate of accomplishment is stagnant or about the same, but the count of significant figures is going up.
And that, I think that tracks prima facie, right? Stuff that we can see. Since the 1800s, the number of people who have PhDs has skyrocketed.
Yeah.
I mean, it may still only be something like 1% of the population, but access to education has absolutely gone up. That's been part of the liberal push in the West, is more access to education. But by virtue of that, when you give more access to education, inherently, nothing about giving more people PhDs is going to mean necessarily an increase in rate of significant accomplishments by people with PhDs if you've lowered the barrier to entry. It's
also to do with more specialization. So when
oh my god.
Yeah. So when the pool of PhDs is enormous, what you end up with is people saying, well, I would like to go into this particular area of, I don't know, particle physics or whatever, and then they go in there and they find that actually there aren't that many positions for particle physicists in particular areas, so they have to sell themselves on something unique. So they end up going into a niche area of particle physics, which may produce significant results in, right? They may be a force to be reckoned with within that, but it doesn't change the entirety of the paradigm of particle physics. It just adds something very useful but very niche to the field, right?
And what makes it sort of, I don't know if the word insidious is right, because it's cruel. I think cruel is the right way to say it. Is that these fields do not communicate with one another. So what ends up happening is that, particularly in the social sciences, I don't know how prominent this is in the physical sciences.
Yeah.
But in the social sciences, what happens all the time is that one subsection of the social sciences, let's say sociology, comes up with a term and a theory that they've studied. And then communication or social psych or whatever other field, subsection of another field, will come up with the exact same hypothesis, test it, use a different name for the theory, and it turns out that sometimes you'll be looking at research and it's been like, this is the same phenomenon that you're measuring here, but there's no inter-academic communication.
Yeah, I mean,
one of the things
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, all you have to do to know this is if you have done an undergraduate degree, the number of times that you get taught exactly the same thing across modules by departments that do not talk to each other, even within the same institution, is ludicrous. I will lose track of how many times they tried to teach me how to critically assess something, or you know, and these sort of general principles where you're going, like, your particular discipline doesn't have a monopoly on this, and this was taught 2 years ago. Why are you bringing this up now? There's no understanding of understanding.
I remember those classes, like the media literacy or how to use the library kind of stuff that were taught in multiple different departments. I was talking to this with my boyfriend earlier, though, on this particular topic. What I found, this is an aside, sorry, but when I was going to do my PhD level thesis, I was wanting to study context-dependent clothing on video game self-efficacy, which sounds really complicated, but it's just a bunch of big words to say. I wanted to see if having boob armor made women bad at video games, because that was a claim a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Boob armor makes me feel embarrassed to be a woman playing games, so I perform more or less adequately at games because of boob armor. And what I had to do to provide the research review, a literature review for that, was go into something called textile research, which when I presented it to my advisor, he was like, "There's a journal of textiles?" And it's like, yes, there is.
So,
I was surprised too.
But obviously there is. Like, it just...
But we have no... And this is communication. So, like, already kind of the black sheep of the social sciences, because we're the barred class. We take from everybody.
Yeah.
So, it's a little bit of everything. And so for even someone in communication to be like, I can't believe there's a journal of textiles. And there is. And I got a lot of interesting research from it. I think it might be dead now, but it was active in like the 70s and 80s. So that's the level of non-communication that these fields have with one another, where they just don't read each other's literature whatsoever.
Chat is saying, "Dear Aydin, physics lives from experiments which can be repeated. It's not like the social sciences." To that, I would say, 1, replication crisis, and
yes.
And 2, I would also say that has no bearing on the communication between these things, and also nobody really wants to do a replication study.
Actually, you're completely correct. We do need more replication studies. The way that the social sciences try to get around that issue, which is a major issue, is that we rely on stuff called p-values or alpha levels. What an alpha level means is that if I were to reconduct this study, usually we set our alpha level at p is less than 0.05. That means if I was to reconduct that study 100 times, I would expect different results 5 times out of 100. More robust studies might set their alpha levels higher, though frankly, when I read that, I think they're showing off. But it means your data, you have good reason statistically to believe that the result of that the findings that you put forward are not due to random chance, but due to systemic, repeatable results, even if you did not replicate the study. We should replicate the studies. But it goes back to something I said earlier when I said, like, those, fail to reject the null studies don't get published. Replications do not either.
No.
That's a major issue. Issue.
They tried to get around this as well. Institutions were forced to say to researchers, you need to produce 1 piece of novel research per year or you're fired. So you need to run this study, and you need to produce something there. So what you end up doing, a lot of things, what they had hoped people would do is run a replication study plus some novel aspect that, might actually produce something of interest. But again, none of it gets published because in the vast majority of cases it doesn't happen. And in fact, it exposed an even bigger problem with the replication crisis, which is that something with, aside from the whole p-hacking thing and falsifying data sets and all that jazz, what you actually end up with is that a p-value of 0.05, a confidence threshold, you end up, it can only be replicated, or at least across the social sciences, 50% of the time. So this is a problem.
That's because they've been p-hacking too, though. That's part of the reason why those p-values are an issue. It shouldn't be if the data were being reported on accurately. The fact that we can't replicate p-values that are less than 0.05 with anything greater than 50% replicability, that is a major issue. And the whole social science, all of social science as a field, needs to be audited, essentially. Because this is a major freaking issue. And another thing that Sean goes into here that's kind of based on that, you talked about how there is a need sort of in some institutions that requires professors to publish. It doesn't matter what garbage it is.
Yeah.
There's also the opposite of that, which is that there's all these professors that are teaching whatever their field is, predominantly the social sciences. Again, I'm a social scientist, so I'm going to rag on my field because we are the worst at this, all of it. There's a ton of professors. You probably know this. What is the average number of studies that are published by a social science professor? Or by, I think, any professor in any field at any university in the world?
I don't know the exact number, but it is single digits, right?
It's 1.
Yeah, I thought so.
It's your doctoral thesis.
Do you know,
that is the average, as in the repeating, right? The most common number.
In the same way,
1.
In the same way, what is the average number of citations per paper?
The average number of citations, which Sean gets into here, is that something like 80% of studies are never cited.
Ever, yeah. It's mental. Just because it's either completely irrelevant or just not groundbreaking or whatever. So it's interesting that we go for that. Right.
It doesn't get read.
It just nobody reads it. Everyone's relying on Google Scholar, and Google Scholar is not going to give you a page with something with less than 100 citations.
Oh, well, no, I come across stuff on Scholar all the time that has 0 citations. But the biggest problem is when you're talking about breaking research. So I'm subscribed to 5 or 6 journals. I pay money to have that subscription, like a lot of money, by the way.
Yeah, it's expensive as fuck.
It's very expensive to not be in academia actively and trying to read this stuff. This stuff is not on Google Scholar.
Yeah.
But and that is another barrier to entry there too, though. But that stuff, if it doesn't pick up any kind of steam or momentum, and it's not archived, it's not published in some more prominent location, if it just sees this journal article publication and it's not published anywhere else, then it gets lost into the ether forever.
Yeah, 100%. And again, given that we've talked about the fact that we still need to publish null findings, etc., it's that it becomes difficult because you don't want to go wading through a sea of papers which are not proving something, and at the same time you need to know what has already been disproved, so as in terms of a hypothesis. So I've
actually not thought about that perspective, but that's very true, because I want to see the stuff that didn't find anything.
I know, but you
only because I have the basis, right? I have the baseline knowledge. If someone doesn't, then that information is essentially useless.
Okay, so we've got this, going back to this article, so we've got this conflict between the counter-significant figures and the rate of accomplishment. And then he says, we see the same trend from Huebner 05, which looks at the rate of significant innovations up to 2005. So this original one goes up to 1950, and this updated one goes to 2005. And the decline appears to be much more dramatic. This is events per year per 10 to the 9 people in the world. So obviously population's always increasing, presumably. So
yeah,
that's what we're
certainly in some parts of the world in certain demographics, but yeah.
Yeah, and for various reasons. So each generation is achieving a few significant breakthroughs. This research ranking the importance of Nobel Prize winning discoveries suggests that your best ideas of the 70s were better than those of the 80s. Ideas from the 90s and noughties were not included because none of them have been given Nobel Prizes, almost possible of even steeper decline. And we have
one thing that I'll sort of give a spoiler away here, because I think people listening might go, but what about computers? We, the degree to which that we've increased in our technological advancements is astronomical over the last 100 years. But Sean does explain that, and it's due to the number of people working on it. It's basically brute force group work versus individual genius level work.
Yeah. So it's the individual geniuses we appear to be missing, as opposed to, collective power, as it were. It's not even to a degree it's innovative, but it's not uniquely innovative. It's innovative in that it is improving a technology, but it's not producing an entirely new technology, if that makes sense.
Right.
So
yes,
there's that. We have this lovely data set here that he's provided, comparing Nobel Prize winning discoveries in physics. I would say that this is less pronounced, and if you look at something like the physiology or medicine one, it certainly seems to be there's quite a weird sort of back and forth between
the physiology and medicine one. I don't see any. Now, here's another issue. Sometimes data visualization isn't good. Also, he's truncating entire 10-year groups together.
Yeah.
This isn't compelling, though, to me.
No. If anyone's ever worked with bins in histograms, then you'll know that this is questionable in terms of its presentation. I appreciate that he's put it there to make the century effectively visible, but I don't know if that's actually if it's not just too broad brush to note more intricacies. Does that make sense? And again, he says these numbers indicate that the rate of great ideas is declining, and among those great ideas which are produced, there's a decline in quality. But he hasn't really as well gone into...
We have to go into what quality means, because that's not necessarily objective.
And yeah, exactly. I mean, it has scientists rank the importance of Nobel Prize discoveries against, the ones which preceded them, and it would kind of make sense that the stuff it makes sense that the stuff which is kind of more recent would be ranked lower, not just because they've grown up with it and so it makes a lot more sense to them from the perspective, and so this was of course a natural progression, so that's less important than if I put my mind in the mind of a scientist from 50 years ago of such middling intellect who suddenly comes across this.
I would just say it's impossible to quantify in any meaningful way the relative importance of the wheel versus Da Vinci's flying machine design versus the microchip. How do we quantify the relative value of these ideas? You could get a bunch of people and do inter-rater analysis, but I mean that's just subjective opinion on a mass scale. So a statistically relevant scale. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in chat and you're some kind of research genius yourself and you can think of a way to quantify this, do let us know. But I'm also a bit stumped by this is a very strong assertion on quite a flimsy basis. That's all I'll say on that. So he claims these numbers indicate the rate of great ideas is declining and there's a declining quality. I don't know, looking at this data set either, that you could say that they are in any meaningful, significant way declining, especially in these three areas that he's noted, and especially over...
In fact, the general trend in chemistry looks to be going up.
Yeah.
So
it's...
And in the physiology or medicine, which is a big mixed bag, but the trend actually in that one is going up. It's really only in the physics. area, that that the trend visually appears to be going down. And even that, it depends on a whole bunch of variables involved in the metrics used.
Yes, not to mention Nobel Prizes. That is obviously as much a political award as it is a scientific one. So the actual validity of this is a little bit, even if it's reliable, the validity of it seems to be a little bit, I'm not sure. And obviously we're only dealing with the last century, which sounds like a long time, but really isn't. We could be in a blip. Especially when you consider things like, if you've read anything like The Rise and Fall, The Death of Empires and that sort of thing, the average length of time for a civilization to dominate the globe, if you're an empire, is about 250 years. So ideally, we would have a 250-year data set, but we don't. So we've got to work with what we've got.
That would be a really interesting analysis of applying these data to specific empire level analysis, right? Like these are the ideas that were produced under the height of the Greek dominance. These were the ideas produced under the height of Roman dominance, of the height of the British imperial system. If you could, I think it would be interesting to find where scientific advancements peaked during, and specifically framed within the rise and fall of empires. That would be fascinating.
Joint project. Let's see where we're going. All right.
Sorry.
No, not at all. No, 100%. Like novel research coming out of discussions like this. I love the idea of that. So now, some people may be surprised to hear this slightly spurious claim that he's making here, given the obvious progress that's been made in certain technological fields. This is touching on what Aydin said earlier about computers. So note the growth in computational power over the past few decades. It might be evidence of great scientific progress. This is from 1971 to 2011, and it's about
what I was mentioning.
Moore's law. Moore's law about the rate of the amount of memory and so on, the speed of computers, etc.
Look at how fast you would think. Oh my gosh, we're accelerating incredibly quickly.
And yet, if we look at the next graph, which is data on Moore's law, that the number of researchers working on computers increased by a factor of 25 in order to maintain the growth rate. And so if you account for the number of people working on it, the actual growth rate is pretty stable by the looks. Pretty stable.
I mean, I have to look more into his citation here. I didn't. I could look at it right now. But I trust Sean to a degree, and I'm sure he didn't make up this graph. I mean, you can click on the link. It's right here. Long-run growth in many models is the product of two terms: the effective number of researchers and the research productivity. We present evidence from various industries, products, and firms showing that research effort is rising substantially while research productivity is declining sharply. A good example is Moore's law. The number of researchers required today to achieve the famous doubling of computer chip density is more than 18 times larger than the number required in the early 1970s. More generally, everywhere we look, we find that ideas and the exponential growth they imply are getting harder to find. That's the abstract of this study from 2020.
Yep.
I know I just shit-talked reading abstracts like earlier, but I'm not going to go in and read the whole goddamn thing on stream.
No, especially not when we have the... maybe if we had 8 hours, but we'd... it's not
but
just...
the I see the graph that he has replicated. It's right here in this study. I mean...
Yeah, no...
Which replicated, one just taken directly out of it. No, he didn't replicate it. It's from this study.
This article, when it comes to the methodology and the studies drawn from, seems quite rigorous. So the actual data itself, even if the assertions might be slightly flimsy, the actual data itself seems pretty solid to me. I'm pretty impressed with this. I couldn't fault a lot of it. So,
and if you do, if anyone watching or anywhere does have issues, everything in this article is cited and linked. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I think we should question data more often than we do oftentimes, because it's this deference towards authority that says, like, oh, a scientist published it, so therefore it's true. No, question it.
Mm-mm.
But it's cited here, so.
Yep.
make of that what you will.
So this,
sorry.
Yeah, no, of course. So this paper doesn't just deal with Moore's law. It looked at a variety of technological fields, and it says we can see a decline in growth when we control for the number of people working in a field, and it began at the latest in the 50s. This is curious. Some people might kind of cite, I suppose, the law of diminishing returns with these things. Are we reaching a kind of like, particularly take something like agriculture, where the difference between hand ploughing a field and having a combine harvester that not only ploughs the field but you drive it back and it will harvest everything for you as well, that how much more efficient do you get after that, you know? Because
there's only so much you can get from the ground, right? Physically, there is a peak capacity of what is physically possible, and unless we reinvent physics, right? Unless we reinvent molecular biology and chemistry, we reinvent everything that we understand.
Well, it would be things like the introduction of certain GM foods and that sort of thing, you know.
That's reinventing,
which is
biology.
Reinventing biology. So
unless we get to that, which we are more and more and more, but you can only get so much out of the ground itself without having to majorly reinvent something.
Yeah, and you can look at big things with agriculture, things like crop rotation and technological advances, and also sort of the move from subsistence farming to industrial scale. But you know, now that we're at the point that we're at, and I think it's really arrogant to say there's nowhere that we could go, but at the same time, you know, it's really difficult to say where we could go, and if we can go further, how much more efficient can we get? Can we get, you know, the kind of 10 times better, you know, production rate, you know, time versus yield for the same thing. So he's got these very reason I bring up agriculture is because he has these 4 graphs here which are looking at agriculture, where he's saying basically, yeah, more people are working on it and it's either decreasing or innovation staying about the same. And
I mean, we tried Lysenkoism, right? That worked out great.
And then we have this.
At some point, though, it does come down to physical restraints, physiological restraints. So without reinventing the genome of plants, you're restrained by physicality.
Not to mention the massive investment and equipment that's required to then make that innovation. It's not something, you know, the guy who sat in his shed and turned a dynamo, reversed the way a dynamo worked so that he could get a battery and stuff like that. It's different to the guy who has to go and do 10 years of work in an interdisciplinary team doing work on an enormous project to do with manufacturing things to do with cytokines in the human body, right? It's not the same. It's not the same level of investment needed from the researchers, if we call both of them researchers.
Yeah, and I think also it's not to say that this stuff is stalled inherently. It could go forward, but some of it is stalling due to limitations that are in place scientifically, physically, and stuff like that. You know, like that might be part of the reason why we're seeing the stall that Sean talks about here. I think that also the other things he brings up, obviously, about maybe this inundation of people who aren't geniuses into the fields, is part of what looks like the stall. But some of it might be that we're hitting a wall, you know what I mean? And I don't think it's it's organic completely. Because, for example, if there wasn't an incredible, ridiculous prejudice against nuclear energy, I think we would have a much cleaner, safer energy system all over the world. But because there's this just crazy fear, and it is irrational fear of nuclear energy, and really as we are developing more and more advanced nuclear systems, but they're being lobbied against by big solar, which I never thought would be a thing, but it's
and I'm a fan of solar, but it's like, yeah, there's definitely I get infuriated
to run your sink in your house.
Yeah.
Not to run everything else. I also am a fan of solar. I think solar is a good thing.
Yeah.
Wind, I have a more deep issue with. Wind energy is actually incredibly environmentally destructive.
Yeah.
It has caused a lot of human deaths that people have no idea about. In fact, per kilowatt, both wind and solar have caused more human deaths, again, per kilowatt than nuclear energy. Think about that. I don't have the citation in front of me. It's not hard to find.
And let's not
because
even
nuclear provides a huge amount.
And that's not even
Solar
to mention the fact that the vast majority of nuclear deaths were caused by uranium and plutonium reactors, when we now look to use thorium, which is so much safer. It's not even funny, and it produces more energy. So it's suddenly we became a climate change and sort of energy stream there. But we have this final figure 2, which is obviously collating across all fields that is examined. The evidence on research productivity. Now, again, when he says the number of researchers and research productivity there, I do think there's been a significant change in, and he will get onto this later, about like the age at which innovation happens. So it's 30s. Mid-30s, and we have this very particular mindset at the moment when it comes to research, and it's so rushed, and it's all a push so that you can get tenure, so your job's not at risk, and there's no real environment in which, I don't know, like any researcher I know feels like their job is secure and safe enough that they can go through a risky proposition anyway. Right?
Yeah.
So
right.
Because they know as well, because the number of researchers has increased, that they could just be replaced. So because the barrier to entry for their particular field or university is actually quite low. It's quite low.
Right. We've allowed more and more people in, and I'm not going to talk too much shit. The people that I got my master's degree with, for the most part, none of them, when we were asked at the start of the year, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And we're like, all of them said, I couldn't get a job out of undergrad. Besides me. I was the only person in my graduate program who said it was because my reason was, well, I'll state my reason, which is my raison d'etre in all of life, which is to contribute positively to the wealth of human knowledge. That is my raison d'etre in everything. I was the only person who had any kind of rationale like that. Everybody else was, I couldn't get a job. They all said they want a master's degree. What's the reality then? You have an increase in master's and doctoral degrees for people who don't know what the hell to do. Again, I think that the massive increase, like I said, the number of people, the mode of publications is 1. I think that's gotten worse over time.
Yeah,
I don't have the data in front of me to show whether or not that's increased. But the mode right now is 1. 1 publication per person with PhD. That's ridiculous. We're supposed to constantly produce research.
Yeah. And it's different between, obviously, there are practitioner fields and so on who, particularly psychology, etc., but even the clinicians, so people who just, effectively do counselling and produce things for people with, very strong psychoses, shall we call them, and strong conditions like that. People with, I'm losing the word here, but things like very traumatic conditions, and they are still expected and still do produce work on the basis of that or on the side, and that's also very different to researchers who are lecturers at universities who are producing work to keep their job, and none of it ever gets published. I mean, I was you have to experience this, right? Yeah. I was really surprised when I was going through my undergrad. I was like, I just want a couple of citations before I leave. Yeah. And so I went off and I found one of my lecturers who was doing a study on an intervention to help women who'd gone through domestic violence, and went and did that, and it was very interesting, etc. Aside from the I won't shit talk the researchers themselves too much. Although I will say I was struck by the lack of a sense of urgency on their part. But nothing came of this, and it got to the point where they produced the paper and, you know, they maybe fired it off to a journal here or there, but there was nothing really going because the important thing had been done, which was to get the paper done so that they could show that to the university and then do nothing with it. And that was quite jarring for me because not only did I lose my citation for the work I'd put in, but it was also the machinations, the machinery of academia is in and of itself a very strange and bureaucratic thing, right?
I guess I've been extremely lucky in that every time I thought that was happening to me, the study did end up getting published. Sometimes that's another thing people don't know, is that sometimes the work that you see published, that's published today, it might have been conducted 2 or 3 years ago because they've been trying to get it through publication for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, the data you see today may have been conducted years ago. It just took them that long to get it through the academic process. Yeah, that's terrible, though. And it happens all the time, where you try to... I was involved in some research like that. I was not by a bad guy, great guy, but I was conducting research on religious persecution of Christian Armenians. That study never saw publication. Mm-hmm. But still interesting. I mean, he didn't recruit me in bad faith, but that does happen to undergraduates and specifically graduate and doctoral level students. More graduate than anyone else, I think, because the graduate level people are trying to really beef up their resumes for doc school. And they just get used and thrown away for like these passion projects or they're not even passion projects. Like you said, it's just for you to keep your, as a professor, for you to keep your tenure.
Yeah.
So you can pretend like you're doing research, which is absurd.
It's difficult.
I know the most published person in the entire field of communication. He doesn't do that. But for every one guy there is like that, there's 500 who just do the minimum.
Yeah, and I think, of course, we're observing a little bit of the Pareto distribution, which... to bring in the Peterson again, the Pareto distribution, where, you know, the square root of, like, people say, oh, it's 10% of the people do, you know, the 50% of the work. It actually ends up working out.
Sounds like a racist.
It ends up working out as the square root of the number of people in the organization do 50% of the work. But which, you know, makes sense in and of itself. There's a distinct lack of passion, I think, in a lot of this. It's, I mean,
very depressing.
You really had to be passionate before, and now you can go through and really just break even. I mean, it takes something as simple as in this country, so the UK, the number of universities increased massively, especially with the reduction in polytechnics and stuff like that, and this led to an enormous influx of effectively job positions, but in middling to low tier universities, which are these new ones primarily, where people can just be flitted around, and they flit around a bit and they just sort of subsist, and then eventually they worm their way into other institutions and can poison them with their mediocrity. But it's not all, I will point out, not all, but it's a I think it's easier to do less in academia now than it was before. That's the way I feel about it.
Yes, that's a great way of describing it, because you can basically, again, like I said, the mode, it's one published paper, and when you look into the data, it's your doctoral thesis. And when we get even further into the data to make that more insidious, because this is insidious, the vast majority of people who publish their doctoral thesis, which is pretty much everybody, because you are under a pretty big stress to publish your doctoral thesis. It does not get published by a real paper, or by a real journal, excuse me. It gets published by these predatory, fake journals that are pay to play and pay to win.
Yeah.
That's who publishes your research. And if that's your one publication, as it is for the mode of scientists, then I don't I'm sorry, but I question the validity of scientists in general, and it's exactly what Sean is talking about here. But the fact that we have an increase in the number of people who are highly educated, but a decrease in the productivity of research.
The most infuriating thing I find, especially because we've touched here on the journal issue as much as anything else, the journal issue is they are so predatory. They not only charge you if you want to publish in them a lot of the time, but they also they also are making an enormous amount of money. I think I was looking into this the other day, and the largest aggregate journal company, so the people who own a large number of journals, including Nature and all that jazz, made revenues of $6 billion last year. And
was it Elsevier?
Sorry?
Was it Elsevier?
Maybe. It sounds like that would be
Probably.
the one. But the point is, I was picking up on this as well because Gadsad, you know Gadsad?
Yeah. I love Gadsad.
And he was asked by a reputable journal to do some peer review, and it was kind of sold to him as, you might get some exposure if you do this, and he was like, I don't need your exposure. Basically.
Insulting. How absolutely insulting.
But you look at it and you go, because I was going, how much would it actually cost to run a journal, especially in this day and age when it's primarily online and you only need to maintain a small staff and server space, etc. And you just need to ensure that you're getting people to actually peer review these things. And then it turns out that they don't even pay their peer reviewers, and it's all just volunteer based, basically, and their overheads are virtually nothing, and it's all profit, and they're trying to charge you $35 a paper. Ridiculous.
No one pays. Wait a minute, dude. No one pays peer reviewers.
No.
This might be something that the other people don't know. This is insider knowledge, right? Ooh. The way that peer reviews are conducted is that you're basically selected by a journal to say, oh, you're a good scientist. You've applied for this position. They don't just pick you at random like Hunger Games.
Yeah.
But you've applied for this position, and it is a big boon to your career as an academic to be a reviewer, because you can say that you are one after the fact, not while you're doing it, but after the fact, because during the fact it's supposed to be anonymous. Blind peer review is the purpose.
Yeah.
So the issue, though, is that people who, one, are trying to get ahead, apply for peer review positions. Two, they're not unbiased. And here's a really big thing that a lot of people outside of the fields might not know, is that if you are within a specified field, let's say, so my field is game studies, right? That's my specified tiny little field, subsection of communication, game studies. I know every single person in this entire field. I have been at a bar with all of them. There's 30 of them. That means it doesn't matter if I submit my paper to you anonymously, you know who wrote it, right?
Yeah,
because you know who has the perspective.
And who's been working on what.
Anonymous. Yes, and you know because you all talk. And so, of course, they're going to give preference towards people that they know and like and want to see their research published. Even when we have done, because and by the way, there's really no better way to conduct this, because the I guess really ironic thing about it is that you can't have someone who doesn't understand the field do the peer review, because they don't understand the field, so they wouldn't know what they're looking at. So you have to have people who know whose research they're reading review quote unquote blind review the field. This makes the entire thing bunk and nonsense.
They also assume that there's like some kind of wholly enshrined doctrine of peer review procedure, which there just isn't. It's just someone.
People are people.
Yeah.
People are biased. You're never going to get rid of it. It's really funny when you have a bunch of social scientists who know this shit doing it anyway.
Oh, goodness. So yeah, aggregate evidence on research productivity. The number of researchers has gone up. The research productivity has gone down. We've talked to a couple of reasons why we think that might be, etc. But Sean's going to give us his own perspective on this now. So he's saying on subjective grounds, remember we were talking about the subjective and the objective measures, this number of researchers versus research productivity is more of an objective measure, but then you have the subjective measure. So on subjective grounds, I think it's reasonable to say that despite massively increasing the number of people working in academia, we've seen an absolute decline in the rate of major theoretical progress in most academic fields, which is also to say nothing, just to tag on to him here, of the rapid expansion in the number of fields themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly in the humanities.
Yes, it goes back to that thing I mentioned earlier, where like I was studying this thing in communication, and we had no idea that textile research existed. Even the textile research was older than our field. There's no excuse for that.
Nope.
There's no excuse for that. But it's become so segmented down, and we don't. Again, the one reason I would recommend COM as a field, if people are interested in the social sciences and you're looking for, like, I don't know what kind of social science I want to go into, COM's going to give you the best, for lack of a better word, vivisection of all of the humanities and social sciences. At the same time, you won't be respected as a communication scholar because it doesn't have the right name, right? It is it's the Bard class. So if you want to be the Bard class, go ahead and do COM. Otherwise, stick to like social psych or something else, sociology.
This stream brought to you by the communications sector.
Be very careful. I fucked up earlier. I said communications. I instantly hated myself. It is communication without an S. Communications with an S is usually like a journalism. Communication without the S is the social science field. Sorry.
And if you get it wrong, you'll be taken out in front of your family and shot. And that's just
at
the way
least by
it's going to
me.
be. At least by. So, I'm not Daredevil, but I will kill you if you get this particular distinction wrong. Okay.
That's one reason I'll break my no killing code. Get that S there. It's unforgivable.
Alrighty. So, he's going. So he's saying theoretical progress is measured in terms of paradigm shifts, and then he has the great source of Wikipedia here.
Beautiful. To
say a list of paradigm shifts, which isn't very complete for stuff outside of the natural sciences, but it's general one. People shit on Wikipedia. I think as long as everything in the article can be cited and traced back, it's usually all right. But you don't want to cite the actual Wikipedia article. You want to go to proper sources. But
it's very funny. What was it? Was it the not New York Times? Who made this? Was it New York Times? Did that article where they were fairly recently, but they were talking about like avoiding fake news. Right. And they said, if you're confused about something, just go to Wikipedia. Don't Google it. Don't go to Google Scholar. Just go to Wikipedia. And if you can't find it on there, then it's Nazi propaganda. I was like, I can't believe it. It was extreme. I'm being a little flippant.
Yeah.
And simplistic. But I mean, that was basically what they said. Is that like they said me squeezing my version of the meaning out of it is that if you go to Google and don't just go to approved of sources that we have said, Washington Post, that we have said are correct, then you will fall down the alt-right Nazi rabbit hole and you will end up on Stormfront, which is I'm confused by as a concept, but okay.
As someone who has enjoyed over the years all of the different a huge number of just random Wikipedia edits that people have managed to get away with over time.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Not to mention the fact that as an academic researcher, I've looked into things and it's amazing how many times you will click a citation from a Wikipedia article and it will take you to a media source which is making a citation, and that citation links back to the same Wikipedia article.
And it becomes cyclical.
And it's there.
That stuff's disgusting.
Or
that's absolutely disgusting. I hate that. Cyclical citation is the worst. Don't do it.
Yeah. Or you click on the citation and it goes to a journal which no longer exists and there's no way to verify it. So it's a friend of mine was doing her study and she got... I'm trying to remember what it was a locus of control scale, and I can't remember who the primary guy is. But
who does locus of control? I don't remember anymore.
I know it begins with a. It begins with a.
should know that.
It begins with a G, and I can't remember what it is. But,
not going to look it up because I'll feel bad.
But basically, he created a scale for locus of control, which had 29 items on it. I think 6 of which were dummy items, and then
right.
And then a few of them were, and then the other half of the remainder were internal locus of control. The other half were external, and she was running the study. She already had like 100 items that she had to give people, so she wanted a shortened version of this scale.
Yes.
Found a 12-item shortened scale, maybe 13, and then ran into issues when we were going through the data because we ran the Cronbach's alpha on it, and it came back as .2. And I was going,
no.
oh dear.
No.
For people who don't know, a Cronbach's alpha is the measure of how internally reliable your scale is. Are the questions that you've got measuring the construct you think they are they related to one another? .2, it ended up partially being an SPSS issue and a couple of other things, but the amount of hoops that we had to jump through in order to find this scale in the first place, which and then to trace back who had developed it and how, because of this cyclical citation thing, where the person who had used it had cited the original scale but not the updated one, and so you then had to jump through all these extra hoops to find where the shortened scale had come from, and it was an absolute bloody nightmare. So,
but there was a published study you got the shortened form of the scale from, right? Or did you contact the researchers directly? Do you know if she did? Because when I was doing, I had to develop a shortened version of the player avatar empathy instrument, or that I can't remember the original citation on that now. But I had to contact the researchers for that because they did have a shortened version that they used that didn't have great Cronbachs, right? So we were like, well. If I'm putting it in a battery, people might not understand this, but there's something called essentially study fatigue or questionnaire fatigue, wherein if you give someone a questionnaire that's 10 pages long, at some point they'll just start drawing swastikas in the... They'll
just randomly fill it out,
like your instruments. Yeah, they'll stop answering because they get bored. So you can only have studies that are so long. So that's why we particularly when you're putting a bunch of things in a battery, you need to try to have the shortened version of the scale, and we need to know if the scale is accurate at being able to measure what it says it's measuring, which is validity. And unfortunately, sometimes when you truncate a scale, it's no longer valid.
Yeah. Even if it remains reliable, it's just not measuring the same
Yes,
thing.
It might be reliable, but not valid, and that's a whole other goddamn thing.
What usually happens is you start off with one scale, which has been created using a variety of measures, including factor analysis, and then over time, other researchers and you, if you're still in the interest of doing this particular scale, strip away the dead weight items, and you end up with a revised scale. But it takes about 10 years if you're doing this with all of your time to make it work.
And even then, you're never really exactly sure. This is a complete problem of social scientists. Social sciences is that you are never sure about the actual external validity of your scale.
Yeah.
You don't really ever know if your scale is measuring what you think it's measuring. You're just doing it to the best of your ability and knowledge to say, I think this is measuring what I think it's measuring.
Yeah. Don't trust anything which comes out of the social sciences. That's not what I'm saying.
unless I make a video on it.
Well, we know that Schadenfreude is solid, don't we? There we go. But
well, I only made 4 videos about it that YouTube started to hate those videos, being like, shut up about this.
Okay, so where were we now? We went off from Wikipedia and cyclical citations into a whole.
Wikipedia.
I like to think that people were kind of enjoying the tangents though, so that's the hope.
The Wikipedia stuff is kind of important for people to understand, that Wikipedia can be a good source, but
I do,
use it sparingly.
I like when it comes to academic articles, often they're very, very dry. So I really like the fact that he's put in brackets after saying, "I think I'm being unbiased here." That I'd probably think this even if I were biased, so it's a worthless impression. So we're just gonna have to.
We can never really pick ourselves.
So
no, Sean's absolutely correct. We try.
Yeah, take it with a pinch of salt. Anyway, in psychology, the typical list for this sort of thing, remember that we're talking about paradigm shifts, would stop with humanistic psychology and the cognitive revolution, thus in the 50s. In economics, it would be probably end with Keynesianism, monetarism, and maybe a few other theoretical developments, but that would not extend past the 70s. In statistics, we got path analysis, significance testing, and meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is one of the most abused concepts, but we won't get into that. And
it really is, yeah.
And so largely, again, would end mid-20th century. In philosophy, a list of paradigm shifts would end with postmodernism, existentialism, and analytic philosophy, which occurred prior to 1970. Others I've spoken to tell me the same is true about other fields I know less about, such as linguistics and history. Which is not to say there's no progress, but that it's largely incremental as opposed to shifting an entire paradigm, or it's failed to gain widespread acceptance. E.g., he says evolutionary psychology. And again, evolutionary psychology is one of these. I think it's tough with psychology.
Evolutionary psychology just hurts people's feelings, and I'm sorry, but that's the only reason why people have an issue with it. It hurts people's feelings.
And it's not even like it has fairly widespread acceptance within a particular group of.
It gets real within actual academia. Widespread acceptance within pop psychology. No acceptance.
Yeah.
Excuse me. These are not the same groups of people. People actually publishing and doing research. They don't care for the most part. Some of them do, but for the most part, they don't care about your political crap. Evolutionary psychology is still a recognized field. The fact that it hurts people's feelings is ridiculous, and nobody gives a crap when it comes into how we actually conduct research.
The fact that evolutionary psychologists do not have a paradigm which is accepted and used by the majority of psychologists, and I will define that as psychologists, not researchers, is because we have a bloating in the number of psychologists as well. So it's there's multifaceted reasons for paradigms not shifting, right?
We can also go into the other reason why you might see less stuff come out of things like which could give a biased interpretation of the data, which is that, for example, to be able to have access to a laboratory to conduct, let's say, an oxytocin analysis, or to have access to an fMRI machine to be able to do a complex analysis of brain structure reaction to social stimuli, all of that requires a lot of money and therefore requires a larger institution. Thereby, it inherently means that smaller institutions and smaller researchers will not have access to the same things that bigger researchers at bigger institutions will have the access to. It doesn't mean that these data are becoming unpopular. It means that they become more and more expensive. Having the ability to just run a basic oxytocin analysis, a cotton swab analysis, can cost hundreds of dollars per participant. So you'd need a lot of money to do that. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a tangent, but like that's why sometimes if you look at something, it looks like a certain study is going down, or a certain area of research is going down. It might just be because it's expensive.
You're absolutely right, and it is very notable, particularly within UK institutions. I don't know how this works abroad, but the institutions which have there's a big difference. Some institutions give funding for everything from undergrad to doctoral to postdoctoral stuff, and others give absolutely no support whatsoever. So I studied at the University of Greenwich. We get absolutely no support whatsoever. Compare this to my supervisor for my third year project, who had done work at Goldsmiths, and whatever you think about Goldsmiths, he was quite surprised because he got $3,000 to use for incentives for one of his postdoc stuff. So it's it's also about participant sampling and the resources that you have to hand. So it's very difficult.
Well, I'll tell you my experience in that real quick. To briefly explain my doctoral experience, what studies got funded. Studies that were funded by the US government because they were being used for military application, and studies funded by Google. That's the studies that got funded and paid for.
Do you want to kill kids or just brainwash them? There's your two options.
This was dealing with the prior was dealing with soldiers who had serious injuries, physical, usually amputations. So not fun stuff. And the latter was the first one was the military, and the latter was Google, which was Google Glass, which is what we were studying at the time, which never manifested, interestingly.
No, I remember.
Whatever.
I remember following it at the time, and and yeah, it just falling by the wayside. Amazing how
maybe it was our research. Maybe it was our research that made them decide to get rid of it. I wonder. Very interesting. I never thought about that, actually. Oh well.
There were issues relating. I remember there were a couple of issues relating to Google Glass, especially with the beta testers. One was because it worked off cards, didn't it? Like cards, which appeared. That's what they called the little things which appeared in the display, and like it was possible to hack them remotely and then put pornography on the cards and stuff like that.
I mean, that's what everyone was looking at on it anyway. Let's be real.
It's just bizarre, like. But there was, all sorts of issues.
We basically found that like people felt very uncomfortable. It made them embarrassed to be using it in front of other people.
Oh, it was
That's what we found in our data collection.
It was a weird and ugly device, and it was voice activated.
And it was shameful. It was shameful. Like that people got embarrassed by wearing it in front of. We just took a participant, we put them in front of a room of other people, and had them wear the Google Glass, and they were like, "I don't want to wear this anymore. Please take it off."
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep, it's got to come as contact lenses.
Where is any mention of Google Glass today? That was a big thing 5-6 years ago.
Yeah,
not anymore.
I remember being very excited for human HUDs, but it just never happened.
Very interesting. They probably didn't take that research to heart. So not mine. It's in my department, but yeah.
Okay.
But that's the stuff that gets funded, though. That's the point.
I think unless we get back to this, because I think we're about a quarter of the way through, unless we we kind of focus on this a bit, we'll be here till midnight, and I do have to actually work on a statistics course tomorrow, so I've got to have some break.
Let's steamroll through it, man.
Yeah, of course. So you talked about the fact there's no paradigm shifts in all sorts of fields. I think there's a real phenomenon to be examined here, evidenced by narrative accounts, measures of technological productivity, and counts of important scientific contributions. They're all imperfect methods, I'm glad he acknowledges that, but they all converge on the same conclusion, but that they all converge on the same conclusion renders that conclusion more probable.
Yeah, I'm a bit on that.
I mean, in the absence of some other equally powerful evidence pointing in the other direction, I mean, if you're not looking in the other direction, I mean, I would just take...
I'm not completely convinced by this argument.
No, I'm not. It's an argument. That would be like saying right-wing all of our research points to the evidence that right-wing authoritarianism is really bad and that it's the only kind of authoritarianism. But the fact that nobody's looked at left-wing authoritarianism, well, until 2018, doesn't means that
very little research on it. Very little.
If you're not looking, you won't find it, basically. So just got to be a bit careful with that.
Research bias, publication bias.
Many people attempt to explain the falling rate of scientific progress by saying that it will inevitably slow time because people solve the easiest problems in a given science first, meaning each successive generation has to solve harder problems. This clearly is, revisiting these charts, it's clearly untrue for almost all of human history. Again, I don't think that's not compelling to me.
I don't think it is necessarily either. I think that, particularly when you start your data collection out of the 1400s, it does mean you're starting out of the post-Dark Age period, wherein we had to rediscover, to a certain degree, in the West. I mean, obviously, the Islamic culture maintained a lot of the ideas of physics and mathematics that had been previously discovered in the West. Mm-hmm. Coming out of that period, it was a rediscovery of a lot of things. So it's a little bit difficult to start measurement in the 1400s and act like this was a massive increase in understanding, when I would say a lot of the things that were understood by maybe the Greek philosophers and mathematicians. So it was a re-understanding, a reintegration of science.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's my opinion.
I look at it and I go, we've already touched on one of the greatest potential barriers in the form of cost and equipment. Because
Yes.
you can't even... I mean, take something as simple as... I say simple, obviously. It took quite a lot to get there in the end. But, like, the density of metals when it came to absorbing radiation. So when they discovered that they used like the very thin sheet of gold leaf, and they fired electrons at it, and also beta particles, and the only barrier to that research was having access to a beta particle emitter and an alpha particle emitter and that sort of thing. And I appreciate that you had to go to an institution to find that, but that cost is much less than the cost of hiring an entire interdisciplinary team, multidisciplinary team, to examine much more complex phenomena. Like it costs less to understand that particles exist rather than running a particle accelerator. So that
I do want to be clear about something real quick. I agree with you, by the way. The expense and cost of doing this stuff, like I said, like the oxytocin research, just for example, doing a simple mouth swab, it costs a huge amount of money. Mm-hmm. That might be why these universities aren't doing it. I want to be clear, because I feel like I said a cardinal sin, only because I didn't explain myself well. The Dark Ages did not mean a loss of intelligence or a loss of knowledge. It meant a stagnation period, which is why we see coming out of the 1400s a big growth, because it was a stagnation period rather than a growth period. And that was due to people being infirm and sick in large parts, and being disconnected without the Roman Empire. So it's not like information and knowledge just died. It's that it stagnated. I just want to be clear about that, because I realized after I said it, I was like, oh, that sounded dumb.
It's also got a very... it's got a very negative connotation name, the Dark Ages, but it's like...
Actually, there's a really good series on YouTube that talks about inventions during the Dark Ages, quote-unquote Dark Ages. But what I mean by that, though, is that one reason you might see stagnation now is because, as you said, the cost of doing more research is incredibly expensive as it goes forward, because we figured out kind of the basic stuff. The stuff that I can do by putting someone in a room and introducing them to some stimuli and seeing how they react, well, that's kind of been done. Now it requires increasingly technological complexity. So that means more money.
Yeah. So that's one thing which comes to mind, which isn't really addressed in this article. So here we go. So a proponent of the view he's created, the straw man to attack here, as it were, that increasing complexity as opposed to increasing cost is the source of this decline, would have to explain why this only became manifest within the last century. I think it's also very interesting to note that for most of human history, especially in the West, we've been at war. So, and we know that technological innovation tends to increase with war, and 1950s is the end of the Second World War, which is the last major conflict in Europe, right? So, and across the world, really, that we're aware of. Everything's become kind of economic and Cold War conflicts since then.
Yeah, now it's all Cold War.
So,
fifth generational warfare stuff.
Yeah, and it's like before the 1900s, there was obviously the British Empire, there was colonialism, there was we're at war with the French. We had all those little troubles with a certain irritating little thorn in our side in the form of the War of Independence. We were finding America and all that jazz. So all of these things and that kind of international competition, which doesn't really exist anymore in the same way. There's no rush to find something or to make the best use of something, because if you don't, you'll be effectively left in the dust by your competitors.
Right. You just buy it from them. Which is, I guess, a barrier of capitalism, I guess, if you wanted to say. But you could just buy it. And so buy it off of the other innovator.
Absolutely. But the incentives have changed. And then also, but it's not just the incentives for the scientists, because I don't think the scientists' incentives would change, but it's the incentives for the governments and the institutions which are funding all of this research, right? So that's an interesting thing there. Although I won't get too much into it because my history is a little bit spotty, so I can't point out particular things. I would like to know what happened in. Can you see this one by Huebner 05? I'd like to see what happened in the mid 1650s that basically caused this enormous spike in events per year. But
probably the plague. I'm not like the traditional plague, but there's probably some disease or something that was affecting society at that point in time that would have caused an increase in scientific. Usually, it's some sort of sociological or social issue that causes spikes. I don't know what happened in 1670. I'm guessing it's some kind of disease. Would be my guess, but I don't know.
COVID was coming for us even back then.
Well, disease is something that always will follow humanity because we're a biological species. So of course it will. So I would guess that giant spike, if it's to be believed, is something to do with medical issues. Maybe it's not. And by the plague, I mean colloquially, not the Black Death or whatever. Some sort of disease that happened maybe would have caused an increase in research. Would be my guess. I don't know. I could be completely wrong.
Unsure, but I think that's an interesting hypothesis. I'd have to go look at the data set myself, see if that's a notable explanation in there. Maybe he's looked at that, or she, I don't know. Huebner. Okay, so he basically says we're owed an explanation of why it is that this inevitable slowing showed itself at roughly the same time in nearly every scientific field. I think we've proposed an alternative hypothesis for that with the end of global conflict as we knew it, and so on. The fact that this slowing appeared in both very old fields like physics and biology as well as newer fields like psychology and statistics make these trends even harder to explain. I think
it's also... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, because he just finishes this off by saying... it's improbable that various fields would, by random chance, be born at the right time for them all to run out of quote-unquote easy problems within a few decades of each other. And I think that in terms of the straw man he's destroying here, yes, that you could destroy that argument on that basis, but I think that there are... Our alternative hypothesis that we've just discussed is far more likely and doesn't require random chance, right?
Yeah, it's also that when you do have, as his chart shows, the number of people increases, it inherently means that you're going to figure out stuff faster. And as a result of that, too, it means, the amount of significant findings will decrease as you have more people and more publication. All of this, it works in tandem, all of it. None of it's disconnected.
So he goes on and... just says this is unsatisfactory. Historical analysis is always going to be speculative. Yeah, even our one's speculative, right? But we need to look at this. So he wants to explain science's rise in this next section. And he says, look, we see that the rate of scientific progress increased radically between 14 and 1600. And he does a regression analysis showing that rich countries with non-authoritarian governments were more likely to produce great science. I've looked at this data set; it seems all in order.
Yeah.
So
this is Maria's data, and I think it's correct as far as my understanding of it. And again, like stuff we went over before, people listening, is that this stuff doesn't get published in random. Like you have to provide your data set, and someone looks at this stuff. Hopefully, seriously. But I would think someone looked at Murray's data in particular quite thoroughly. And it seems to indicate, but it makes sense, right? If you're being suppressed, what do you come up with? Lysenkoism?
It's the second time you've mentioned that. Can you just explain?
I know, because it irritates me. Lysenkoism is a sort of anti-genetic idea that it was used in the Soviet Union as an idea to grow more crops. And it was anti-genetics because they thought genetics was racist, essentially, or oppressive in some way. And the result was that a bunch of people starved in the Soviet Union because they went against science with something that was palatable socially. So that's the problem with stuff like Lysenkoism.
Yeah,
that's me trying to explain it to the most.
Yeah.
Sorry,
but makes sense. Yeah. So he's gone and said, rich countries, non-authoritarian governments, more likely to produce great science. Unsurprisingly, there is a link between national intelligence, especially the intelligence of the elite, and national rates of scientific progress. So, intelligence level of the 95th percentile correlates at 0.76, which is a pretty good correlation, with its scientific production.
Very nice.
Like, a lot of papers get published with a correlation of like 0.3, and it's infuriating. So
let's hope not. But if I saw a 0.3 correlation, that would be embarrassing.
It is embarrassing. So
0.76. That's a golden number level.
Pretty solid.
That's agenda setting level. No, that was 90, but that's a great correlation.
Yeah.
Correlation, not causation.
So they measured scientific production via various metrics, including Nobel Prize winners and the production of highly cited scientific articles, which is I would hope that it's a bit more robust than that overall, but yes, yeah. Okay. So we have this top ability level, 95%, intellectual classes corrected, cognitive achievement, total average, and we see this nice sort of dual thing by nation. So
what is CHE actually?
Where sorry?
At the top of this graph is CHE. I didn't know what that was. I thought Czech Republic or something, but what is CHE?
I don't know. Like Chechnya?
Great Britain, USA, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, France, Canada, SGP, I don't know. But I know most of these, but I don't know what CHE is.
Switzerland.
It's clearly
I think it's Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. Which doesn't immediately follow, but CHE is their country code, right? And if this is all done by country code,
someone I wrote down where I was like, I don't know what CHE is. The rest all make sense, but yeah, that one I was a bit confused by.
Yeah.
A code I didn't know. The more you know. Rainbow.
Oh god, and that stupid jingle which goes along with it.
Yeah.
So
but that's LGBTQ friendly.
So we've got that. It is really important to note that one of the really irritating things I have is like the dismissal at the moment of intelligence testing and the way we measure intelligence as a product of Western colonial thought. And I'm going at its core, intelligence testing is just a measurement of the human ability to deal with increasingly complex abstractions. So
yes, it's generalized intelligence.
So yeah,
generalized.
And we have the two measures. So we've got IQ and we've got G, which is the general intelligence factor, and obviously now we've moved more into crystalline versus fluid intelligence. So like stored ability versus your ability to learn new things. So it's I think it's unfairly denigrated as, a white Western European thing.
And it is not. This idea that crystallized intelligence is the way that what we're measuring with IQ tests is completely incorrect, and clearly something that's purported by people who have never taken an IQ test. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean, it's because when you take an IQ test, they're not just like giving you questions about history and stuff. No, they have you like put shapes together. That's fluid intelligence. The fact that I can say 3.1415926589793238462, whatever. That's crystallized intelligence. That's pointless and stupid. There's no reason I should have applied to that degree.
The fact that I have knowledge of the fact that I have knowledge of a dozen fantasy worlds from books I read in my youth,
exactly.
it's just worth. But when you look at these things, and intelligence as a whole, it's interesting that the earlier that you're exposed to different abstractions and the way of thinking about things, the more likely you are to engage with it and then have to deal with more complex things. So in some ways, the way we measure intelligence is also a product of the way in which intelligence rises, because it's not just a fixed factor. There is the G component.
But the Flynn effect has been kind of debunked to a degree, right?
Right, exactly.
The idea that as people become more educated, the IQ will inherently rise. That's not what we find.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, wherever you fall on this debate, and none of this should be moralistic in any way, in my opinion, is that, sorry, life isn't fair. And there will be some people who have lower IQs. It doesn't mean they're worse people or they're bad people. It means they're going to have to work harder at some stuff.
And it means they just shouldn't vote. I mean, I'm joking. I'm joking.
I know. But that's just the reality. Like, not every. Why is it only in this IQ area where this becomes an issue? Whereas if it's like, if someone came up to you and said, "Oh, I can't draw. I am terrible at art. I can draw stick figures. That's the best I could do." You'd be like, whatever. That's okay. That's normal. That's fine. But if someone says, I'm not good at math, then for some reason, that person needs to be elevated and put on the same dais as mathematicians. Absolutely absurdist. Absolutely. People have skills and things that they're inherently good or bad at. And there's only so much, I went to an art high school. And the reason, what they told us when first day we showed up, they're like, you were all selected because you have not skill, but talent. Talent does not equate to skill. Talent means capacity. Skill is learned.
Yeah, I had something similar when I joined the Air Force. They sat us down and said, "Congratulations, you have the potential."
Right, exactly. Potential does not equal outcome. Even the smartest person, and I think Sean goes into this at some point. Like the smartest person, IQ, isn't necessarily going to be a professor.
Yeah, IQ is not correlated with, or it is correlated with success, but it's not a guarantee, right? Like
it is not a guarantee.
Absolutely not a guarantee. We will get into that later on. So,
sorry, let's go.
We've got intelligence. No, I love talking about it. I absolutely do. But we want to stick to the article. I tell you what, though, it's just an excuse for us to do another stream in future. That's what it is.
Sure. Anytime, man.
Individualism is another national correlate of scientific productivity. Gordonichenko, which just sounds like the most amazing fake name, and Ronald.
I love when studies have that kind of name matchup, where it's like something crazy and then something really normal.
And they measured innovation by comparing national patents per person, the size of the advanced technology industry in a nation, the share of GDP. GDP obviously is always being dodgy, taken up by royalty and licensing fees, and the number of citations that the nation produces. Finding more individualistic nations tended to have higher levels of innovation, and by several of these measures that association was quite large. Individualism explained over 40% of the variance in several innovation metrics, which is a huge amount.
Yes.
I will point out. Normally, you will get like a combined... Normally, you would love if your combined effect was 40%, and then
I would love if I could find any single individual variable that could explain 10% of variance.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be crazy. 40% is unbelievable.
So, really happy with this. I wish I'd gone through this data set actually and just verified that, but I will trust him on this. Trusting you, Sean. Sean's
good for the most part. Like, I mean, if anyone has questions about this, it's all linked. So go through it. I've read the article. I didn't read every single study in it. I've read a lot of them beforehand, but
Yeah. So it makes good theoretical sense. Scientific innovation is often an act of non-conformity and the result of great individual drive. I actually really like his explanation for this, which comes later. Mm-hmm. But the final national correlate he's going to mention is Protestantism, which is going to piss off any Catholics in the chat. As I've argued in a previous post, Protestantism...
Protestant work ethic, man. It's a thing.
Protestantism increased national levels of education, democracy and wealth, and set up the national conditions in which science tends to prosper, whilst also encouraging cultural attitudes antagonistic towards centralized authority. It is the libertarians' approach.
Yes, we are the supreme individuals, the libertarians.
A theory which says that science will... I'm just going to let you get away with that, Aydin.
No, because it's such a meme. It's such an obvious lie, but that's what some libertarians unironically believe.
And those are the people who get called lolbertarians for good reason. Yeah. A theory which says that science will flourish in nations which are liberally governed, individualistic, Protestant, and highly intelligent gives us substantial help in explaining why science exploded around 1600, especially England. Mm-hmm. Turning from national correlates of scientific progress to individual level analyses, it's important to note that science is largely done by just a few people. Yeah, this is the
fascinating part that we were we already talked about, so we can kind of probably speed through this because we already really laid this out.
Yeah.
But these are the graphs to look at if you want to know the stuff that I was mentioning earlier. We were talking about earlier about how the average, the mode publication for a scientist, that means anybody. That means if you're in college and you have a professor who is telling you what the fuck to think, that guy has only probably, just statistically likely, only published one study ever, and it was his doctoral thesis that allowed him to be able to teach you.
Usually the way I find it works is junior lecturers have only ever published one study. Senior lecturers have published two. And the head of the department might have published more or had one like massively cited thing, and that's the reason they're the head of the department, right? So
my advisor published a study every other week.
Nice. Lucky.
He was crazy.
Lucky girl.
No, well, I don't know. He was very obsessive with publication. His obsessive goal to be the most published person in the entire history of my university, and he achieved it.
Yeah,
he achieved it over the person who founded the department, which is crazy.
Yeah,
so
we've got a guy a bit like that who's managed to get himself access to. He's doing work on super recognizers with the police. So these are people who can look at a crowd of people in Victoria Station in London and pick out who your criminal is, right? Just from being shown the photo, kind of like a super CCTV but with a human intellect behind it. So he was doing research.
I don't buy that, but okay.
I've seen his research, and whilst these people are obscenely rare, they do exist, and it's kind of scary.
They're probably autistic, right? That would be the interesting correlation.
I haven't spoken to any of them, so I wouldn't know.
Well, I mean, like high specificity observers who are taking like that kind of intense look at human. They're either autistic. That's a simplified way of saying it, or they're probably highly trained. I hate any information that is conducted on nonverbal behavior because there's a huge amount of variance in it.
Yeah.
The idea of nonverbal leakage has been kind of disproven over and over again, that anyone can tell it, because for every person who can determine nonverbal leakage, there's a person who can prevent themselves from producing nonverbal leakage. And I know that nonverbal leakage is the most disgusting term probably ever invented, but that's what it's called. When you touch your face or look embarrassed or make embarrassing body language, it's called nonverbal leakage. Great term.
I got drunk last night and I had a bit of nonverbal leakage in the morning.
It's a horrible, disgusting term. Sorry, complete aside.
But as we pointed out, we talked about the 60 to 80% that of people having one citation, the mode being one citation. This is not unique to social science. 60% of physical scientists have only ever published one article. This going as far back as the 90s.
It's their doctoral thesis. Yeah. Let's be really clear. Statistically, it is their doctoral thesis, the thing that they are required to do to get the doctorate. It means more than half of people with a PhD have only published the thing that allowed them to get their PhD.
Yes, the thing that gives them the DR before their name.
Yeah.
So, once again, we see this kind of this distribution, the relationship between scientific literature and contributors to it. Number of publications, percentage of contributors, 60%, 1. And then in order to get to 5, we're already down in single figures. Less than 5% of people have 5 publications or more. And obviously it only goes down from there, so kind of crazy. Murray's data also confirms this. He doesn't provide a chart corresponding to this observation. He should provide
for just one. Because I guarantee, and I've seen these data because I went to grad school, so I know about this. If he truncated or delineated the data between 1 to 9 into 1 versus 2 through 9, the 1 would skyrocket. It would be disgusting how high that bar would be.
So he doesn't give one for science, but he does give one for art and says that it's very similar. And we get this again. You're absolutely right. I'd love to see the breakdown for 1 to 9 here, as opposed to just it being as a block. Other work has showed a small proportion of academic articles account for more than 80% of citations, as we would expect with this as well. So this is especially true in the early 20th century. Less than 10% of articles, 80% of citations. Again, as we'd expect with this. I have no issue with this part of it. Excuse
He's
me.
completely right.
Even today, in most fields, it takes years for an average article to get even a single citation. In the humanities, less than 20% of produced papers are even cited ever, as we mentioned that earlier. Earlier work in physics found that half of scientific citations went to just 200 physicists, and that the top 10% of scientists were roughly 3 times as productive as the bottom 50%. Yeah, a Pareto distribution there again. Thus, scientific progress is largely driven by a small number of scientists working in a small number of countries. Thinking of scientific ability through this frame, we see it's very rare, and the historical picture makes clear the norm is for it to be virtually nowhere. The decline in scientific progress can be seen as a return to normal, and so plausibly the result of the destruction of whatever conditions led to the previous period of great scientific productivity. I don't know if the decline can be seen as a return to normal, but
I don't agree either with that statement. I think that there's a big push in science to not break new ground at this point if it disrupts the political hegemony, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You must be careful. Every single piece of research, every single ethics board that I have to go to. So my original study on framing effects and COVID face masks, which I'm sure a large number of you in the chat have done. And
that's gonna be a dangerous study, my dude.
And my original, well, not really. My results are not that significant, but it's interesting to talk about. But the
concept.
But we can talk about that another time as well. But the original idea I had that I tried to get through ethics was talking about the framing of the messaging of political groups, and I wanted to talk about Black Lives Matter. And I wanted to talk about the use of value emphasis framing, because Black Lives Matter as a name is a value frame in and of itself.
Like pro-life versus pro-choice.
Yeah, pro-life and pro-choice, as is in the climate change thing, Extinction Rebellion, and that sort of thing. All of these things are framed messages in some way, and I wanted to talk about that. And I was just flatly told by the ethics committee that no, this is too controversial. You can't touch any of this. So,
wow.
And it was not that. It was because I wanted to approach it in an unbiased way, basically.
So, I'm going to take a guess. So would your idea would have been to say, like, Black Lives Matter as a framing for the organization versus, like, black supremacy?
No, well, I would have looked at it in terms of the actions of the group versus their framed messaging and their name as a defense mechanism.
That's what I mean. I think the terminology is important there, though. I think if you had if the framing was Black Power versus Black Lives Matter, be a very different result or response from regular people.
Yes.
See Black Power with the big fist, or Black Supremacy, or Kill Whitey,
or
whatever.
Well, it's like if you went to their website, which has changed now, I will add.
I know it has.
Right, where
wanting to
they
get rid of education and stuff.
Abolish education, abolish the police, and replace it with a community-driven initiative where persons of color, I'm using their language, obviously, where persons of color may hire and fire individual officers based on their own interpretation of that officer's conduct, with no due process or anything like that, and just there's that. And if neighborhoods do not want to be policed, don't let them. The abolition of the nuclear family in favor of
that was a big one.
Community education, where you would literally have your kids taken away from you if you weren't conforming to this standard, and there would be no more mothers and fathers, only the community. And I was just like,
only the state. Wonderful, thank you.
Oh my goodness.
Absolutely terrifying
horrific
authoritarianism.
And you say this to people, and they tell you, because they've been indoctrinated and because they've accepted the moral frame, which is different to an emphasis frame, they've taken the moral value frame, and it's different to an equivalence frame. They've taken this moral value frame and they've internalized it now to such a point that even bringing these things up is seen as anti-black, and therefore you're
absurdist.
and you're a racist, and they tell you to your face you're lying, and I'm like, it came from the founders. It's bigger than the founders now, and I'm like, but they're still running it. It's just.
It's ridiculous. I did a series of videos on the 2 + 2 = 5 stuff and the indoctrination and infiltration of the education system.
Yeah.
With the Black Lives Matter type stuff, and it's not new. It's been going on since the 80s and 70s, and it's actually it's insidious. It literally is insidious, designed to teach black and white people that they learn differently, that the things that they learn are different, that black math is different from white math, and that it's okay for people to come up with the wrong answer if they have the right skin tone. It is absolutely vile and evil shit. And when you look into the people who taught this stuff, they have no desire to teach anything other than disintegration of culture. That's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, I often talk about, I say, do you believe the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is actually democratic or run by the people?
I think people on the left might say yes to that. I don't know.
Yeah, some of them do, but if they say yes to that, they're a bit beyond help.
You're gone.
So
yeah, you're gone.
Okay,
yeah,
so
sorry, let's go back.
Small number of scientists who are responsible. Yeah, no, of course, and I think we've definitely got room to chat about that again at another time.
Anytime.
So, with respect to the psychological correlates of genius, there are 2 possible methods of investigation. We can look at their characteristics of scientists who, while not necessarily geniuses, are the best and most innovative we can find. The idea is that there are still differences between
that's the line with the grammatical error, by the way. That really irritated me.
Let me just have a look at this.
First, we can study the characteristics of scientists, who, while not necessarily geniuses, are the best and most innovative scientists we can study. Do you see the grammatical error in this sentence?
I'm struggling, although it is 10 o'clock at night.
I know, I get it, but he's saying we can study the characteristics of scientists who are not geniuses, but are the most innovative scientists we can study, which is kind of an oxymoron. He's saying we can study other scientists who are not the scientists we're studying, but are scientists. I'm sorry, it's just a sentence that irritated me.
It's a little bit unclear. I see what you're getting at with that, but
that sentence, actually, I had to read like 3 times over because I couldn't understand what he was trying to say. But, sorry, that was my issue with the whole document. Was that sentence?
Right,
I was waiting for 2 hours to point out my issue with that sentence.
Right.
I said I wasn't going to bring it up.
Sean last debunked. Completely
debunked. I have one issue with one sentence.
Ridiculous. You should not have been. This should never have been published. Do you even peer review, bro? What are we going to do with you? Anyway. So the idea is that the differences between these non-genius innovators are still different to regular scientists and geniuses. So it's a lesser version of the difference between a regular scientist and a genius, but we don't actually have enough geniuses to study, so we have to look at innovators as well. So the second approach is to study the biographies of the known geniuses that we do have and estimate a psychological profile based on correlates that are likely to show up in that biography, which is a lot more speculative. So we have to look at
really interesting stuff that shows up in this Einsink article. Or this data output, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm with you now, yeah.
Sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit.
That's fine. So, Cox, 1926, analysed 301 eminent individuals and used the same indexes to estimate the IQ of these individuals, giving an inter-rater reliability of about 0.7, which is pretty good. And then Isaac...
It means that you're asking people if they agree with one another. That's what inter-rater reliability is. Yep. And they're saying it was a 0.7, which means that's pretty good. It means most people agree with each other, that the other person is correct in their interpretation.
And then Isaac cited this in his paper, so that's why that's the reference here. And so the obtained IQs and corrected IQs for what we'd expect from these people, and they're pretty high. That's what we get there.
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah. I think the philosopher one is fascinating. Look at the philosopher corrected and obtained IQs.
Yeah.
Because I think when I think of modern philosophers, right?
Yeah.
Like people who would consider themselves a philosopher. People like Vosh. You know what I mean? I wouldn't think like 160 IQ.
I think it really depends. I mean, if you take someone, like there are people who study philosophy, and then there are philosophers, and
right.
So, for instance, I wouldn't call Jordan Peterson, for instance, a philosopher. I would
he's
call
a psychologist.
He's a psychologist who studied some philosophy, but I would consider he had that chat with. Oh God, who's the communist guy who I'm trying to remember his name. He's got a really funny name. Slavoj Žižek, right?
Oh yeah.
All right.
That was fascinating, actually.
Yeah, who I would consider to be much more of a philosopher in his own right. And one of the most interesting questions that came out of the discussion between him and Peterson was, why did you not form Zizekism? Because Zizek has kind of tacked himself on to other things, but in talking to him, Peterson's like, you've got something which seems wholly of your own. I disagree with you, but it seems wholly your own, and it's very intelligent and well thought out. So I think the preponderance of philosophers is actually, again, much lower than it is. And we also don't really elevate philosophers in the same way as, say, like most people think of philosophers and the instant thing that comes to mind is ancient Greece.
Aristotle,
Plato, to a lesser extent, my boy Diogenes.
Yes, my boy Diogenes, the best of the Greek philosophers. Depending on your perspective, but I think that's part of I think you're completely correct on that. It's part of the idea that proclaiming yourself to be a philosopher is arrogant, I would say, and it's unusual in modern history. So
I think
claiming yourself to be a philosopher is a bit of an anomaly.
I am very hesitant to accept the corrected IQs.
These are crazy high. These are ridiculous sort of interpretations, I would say.
As far as I understand the data set, the difference between an obtained and a corrected IQ is the obtained IQ would be
what they actually.
Yeah, what they
thought, what they anticipated they actually scored, and the corrected is because they didn't actually test these people, by the way.
Yeah, these are estimates based on a personality profile and the work they produced.
Right. And then corrected is what they thought versus the general population.
Yeah. So
this is all bullshit. This is a real bullshit graph.
This is unbelievably subjective.
Yeah.
So just please.
Well, it's from 1927 or 1926. Excuse me.
So please take this with a hell of a pinch of salt. But as Sean's telling us here, the results suggest that eminent individuals possess IQs far above average. And whilst I would say that I don't necessarily agree that they are this high above average.
No, I don't agree with that whatsoever.
I think that above average is probably like the obtained scores. It wouldn't surprise me, apart from the 150 plus ones, perhaps
I mean, philosophers. That's the highest. Is the corrected IQ score for philosophers is 180.
Yeah,
that's beyond. That's 40 points beyond genius level.
Yeah,
I'm a little skeptical.
I am skeptical as well. So we'll leave this. So he's saying these IQ estimates are higher than 130, which is the rough average IQ of scientists and mathematicians, and that's from a much more recent study, which I haven't looked up, and he hasn't linked specifically here. But I'm hoping I'm going to trust him that this is taken from actual scientists and mathematicians and not estimates on historical scientists.
He gets down into actual data, like in a paragraph below this.
So the two data points support the common sense viewpoint. A high degree of intelligence is required for a genius, even if we have doubts about the precision of Cox's estimates. Well, thank God he actually says there are doubts about this precision. It is also it's also clear that intelligence, while necessary for genius, is not sufficient. Yes, and this is the fascinating part for me. There are obvious that there are far more people living with very high IQs than there are geniuses. This is empirically attested to by Terman's famous study of gifted children. It took very.
This is the great.
This is
part, yeah.
this is a great sized data set. 1,500 kids is an enormous number of for any study of this type. Normally, we'd expect like a tenth of that. So,
300 would be a huge data set for this kind of level of data. That's crazy.
Not to mention, he's collected them, and they have a mean IQ of 151, which is kind of crazy as well.
We're talking about 1% of the population being measured here, right?
Yeah.
And he has collected a data set of 1,500 people that are within the 1% of IQ.
So awesome. I don't know who he had to suck off to do this, but
somebody.
Pretty good. The lowest IQ is 135, and now I feel stupid.
I know. I'm not.
Like, I've had my IQ tested, and you can all speculate about how low that is, but it's anyway. IQs of 170 or higher were found for 77 subjects. Relative to the general population, the rate of extreme success was extraordinary. In a 35-year follow-up, 77 were on the American Men of Science list, a list of America's top scientists, and 33 were in America's Who's Who, and 2 won Nobel Prizes. However, 1,500, the vast majority of them did not become geniuses, and they didn't achieve any notable degree of eminence. That's not to say that they didn't necessarily achieve wild financial success, and we don't know about that. It's not really mentioned here.
Sure.
But in terms of eminence
Academics,
in innovation, it's just not the same. The largest difference between scientists and non-scientists in Big Five personality traits is conscientiousness, which is basically how hard you work, apart from a few other things, how much you can focus, etc. The correlation, that's a very reductive description, but it works for now.
To be clear, just because I did a simple calculation, that means that it's about 20% of their data set that was these people that were that had a mean IQ of 151. 20% of those went on to have these big achievements. So it's 1/5. 1/5, excuse me, 1/5.
Are you saying that 300 of them did?
No. 77 out of 1,528 is a 1/5 proportional number. It's less than that, isn't it?
Yeah, 77 of 1,528.
Yeah, shit. I don't know. My brain's dying. That's gonna be what? I'm sorry.
I mean,
what is that calculation?
It's about. It's about 5%.
Yeah, 5%. Sorry, I put the decimal place in the wrong. Yeah. So like 5% of people out of this entire thing who have an IQ of 150 or whatever are able to achieve these great things. That's not a good percentage. I just made myself look like the biggest fucking moron. Now I want to go hide in my shame hole.
You're telling us we can trust your numbers, Aydin? I mean, really? No, it's fine.
Not when I calculate things on the fly because I'm a woman. I'm not able to do it. God damn it! I always embarrass myself when I calculate things on the fly. God damn it!
Amazing.
Oh, whatever.
If there's one thing,
I'm gonna get dunked on for this for fucking 4 years.
I'm afraid we've determined that you would not.
Oh, that's the problem. It's not 5%. It's 1.9%. I put the decimal place in the wrong place. It's 1.9.
Yeah, of course it is. What the fuck am I looking at? I messed up the numbers as well. What?
God, fucking retarded. Am I wrong on that?
77 out of 1,528. Which
it's 1.9.
Why is my... Like, I'm just running it through the calculator now. Why is that giving me 0.05? Like, 80 out of...
Divide 1,
10% would be 152. 153.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 77's about 5%. Yeah.
Oh, okay. How am I getting the wrong number then? What the fuck ever? How am I getting this wrong? This is why I run everything through SPSS.
Oh,
Not through my fucking stupid ass brain. Alright, this is embarrassing. Dunk on me on Twitter.
let's
Dunk on me.
let's
Embarrass me. Tell me I don't know basic math, because clearly I don't.
and tonight on
Jesus.
The Rise and Fall of Science, Aydin Paladin asks to be degraded on Twitter.
Degrade me, boy. How do I get this wrong? 77 subjects out of 1,005 to 8.
Yes.
It's a really small percentage.
It's almost exactly 5%. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
tiny, whatever. Ignore me. Let's go on.
So we were talking about conscientiousness. The correlation between the year of publication and the size of the gap was 0.58, meaning the time with time the gap between
I have issues with his next paragraph.
The time with time the gap between scientists and non-scientists in conscientiousness has been rising quite rapidly. So over time, scientists are becoming more conscientious. Moreover, when comparing creative and less creative scientists, the gap in conscientiousness is rather small. So even less creative scientists still have a high degree of conscientiousness even compared to their creative counterparts. Conscientiousness could plausibly help people do science, but it doesn't differentiate good and bad scientists. But it does seem that scientists of the past were less selected for conscientiousness. So it's not much of a correlate. That's a really interesting observation.
Yeah, it's minor, and this is something I was talking about like early on, where the thing that drove me out of academe was not the work. It was the socialization.
The people.
Of having to be around people and having to play political games with people, which was, to me, irreconcilable, or at least unrelated with science. Why do I have to play stupid political games, social games with you when I just want to conduct a study?
Yeah.
But you have to get a PhD, and everyone in the audience should understand this. After I just embarrassed myself very deeply with my inability to do math, something you should do and should understand is that going and getting your PhD is not just like completing classes like it kind of is in undergraduate. It's a bunch of social games that you play with people to basically beg them to allow you to finish that degree.
Yeah. It is very much becomes the networking game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So going to this thing about conscientiousness not being necessarily a thing is really interesting, because it's like Archimedes comes to mind. You know, the eureka moment in the bath, where it just has this massive breakthrough at one point. And most innovators have it. You know, if you look at maths as well, maths is an interesting one, because they say if you haven't produced anything by the time you're 35 in mathematics, you never will. And I think most
that's an interesting idea.
And most of them produce something by the time they're 25. Maths is one of those weird ones where the skill shows itself so early, and then moves on later in life. Whereas in terms of scientific innovation, as we're about to go into here, it tends to be that most people have their breakthrough in their mid-30s.
Mid-30s, yep.
And this is, you wonder what's underpinning that, and this article doesn't really go into it about like the underpinnings of the source of that kind of innovative moment.
I could give some ideas. And it goes back to what I just said, which is that when you are going through the doctoral program, and this would explain part of this decrease that we see, is that the doctoral program system in the United States, at least from my perspective, I don't know elsewhere, but I would imagine it's similar. It's actually designed to squash your individualism and your personal ideas. It's to make you more conformed.
Yeah.
You want to just produce data that makes the university that you're working for look good, that allows you to get your PhD.
No waves.
Because in an absolutely incomprehensible fashion, takes the one job on Earth, not the one job, but one of the most important creative jobs on Earth, and tells it to become conformist in order to become a part of that career.
And also, I don't know what your experience has been with psychology, but most psychologists, especially going through undergrad, who I interacted with, are the most mind-numbingly cowardly people I know. And they just
I don't know about that.
they
Again, I'm not psychology, I'm communication, which is a little bit different.
Once upon a time psychology, but the it's just no one is willing to sell themselves. They are not taught to sell themselves, obviously not in a body.
Well.
They're not taught to communicate. They're given we had a presentation module. So you have to give 2 5-minute presentations and a 10-minute presentation as a course of this, and it's all peer feedback. So it is summative. It is summative.
Awful.
So the response of the assessor does make sense. Does count towards the degree, but in terms of the rest of the room giving feedback, it's all peer study. And of course everyone's so kind, and I'm like, I went through fucking military presentation briefing, be as concise as possible, do not do verbal tics, no non-verbal spillage, leakage, leakage even.
that's an American word, maybe.
Well, we had you stand there, and over the course of the 10 minutes that you do it, there are 3 people marking you from your peers. So these are not even the assessors. The assessors are there marking you as well. But you have three persons. One of them is listening for verbal tics. One of them is looking at non-verbal tics and presentation, and the other is looking at the actual content. And someone in there as well is also looking at your visual aids. So you get this, and so each person in turn gives you basically the shit sandwich rundown of your in terms of feedback for each of these different characteristics, and it is brutal. And if there is nothing to sandwich, it is you're getting it in the neck basically. And then I come from that and I go into an undergraduate program where I was told by my lecturers twice after these presentation cycles to be kinder to people. And I'm going, no, they will not learn.
No, of course it's not being in any way encouraged or enforced. I will say at least the better, I guess, thing that we didn't have to do that. But when I finished my public relations degree, the way that we had to finish that was very similar. It was the final course after 4 years of study, though. And it wasn't in front of students. It was in front of a business that we were hired to work for free, provide a PR book.
Okay.
Basically to make all the marketing material for a business for free, and they sign up with our university to do this. And it was really hard to sit in front of this business owner. That's actually because that's more realistic, I think. I really appreciate it actually that in my school being no, you have to sit in front of the business owner who's going to look at your report and your presentation and tell you whether or not they think it's shit. That's way better than students that are motivated to hate you because you're a competitor with them.
Yeah,
in a way that
they're
always understand.
Or they're so inexperienced because they've never worked that they don't know what to do. They're like, oh, these slides, I guess there was a bit too much text on it, and I'm like, no. If you give these slides to me in a pitch, in a meeting, in a business, I will send you away because it's not worth my time. I will just read your slides. If you're going to read off your slides, you may as well not be a presenter. If you're not going to look at me when you're talking, I don't know what, I'm going to be bored. If you're not going to, if you're going to constantly tick and click your pen and tap your feet, etc., that's what I'll remember from the...
I hate the pen clicking. Oh my god, that's my trigger. The pen clicking is my trigger.
That's what I will remember from the meeting as opposed to your pitch. You need to get this right.
And there's so much research on that. Speaking of which, I really have to pee. I will be right back.
Okay, no problem.
I'll continue with the article. I'll be right back in a couple seconds.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
I will. Yes, I will address the chat. Why not? Hello, chat.
Oh yeah, read this. While I use the restroom, I'll be right back.
I will save the ones which are directed specifically to you. But yes, go. Right. Let's see what we've got here. Razor Fist is right from DRT is king. Effective copyright law caused the massive spike in the late 19th century and early 20th century, and regulations have killed progress. I haven't actually looked at the correlates between regulations and copyright law, so I would have to have a look at that. But that's a very interesting one. Thanks, DRT is king. I'll note that down. The Teabag who laughs said, "Did someone say true crime?" Thanks, Teabag. Teabag is a true crime YouTube channel, so if you're interested in that sort of thing, go check him out. Sutsgoen says, homogeneous thinking and fear of sticking out equals cause. Sort of. Homogeneous thinking is one of the biggest problems, because when your peer review system becomes entirely predicated on a group of people with no diversity of thought, that becomes a huge issue, especially when that homogeneous thinking is also characterized by little personality schisms between individual researchers who just hate each other's guts. It's a real pain. Fear of sticking out, I don't think is that much more of a cause, because it's not a fear of sticking out, but people will kind of Machiavelli style tactics will basically say, oh, I'll just wait until I'm tenured and then I will make a stand, and then they don't basically, because they're either stuck in their ways or the time for innovation has passed for them, and that sort of thing. But everything incentivizes that. It's not just that you have a fear of sticking out, your research just may not be approved at all, because and you don't fear that, you don't get blacklisted, you just won't have a job, right? So it's I don't think it's fear related, although maybe there's something in there. Captain Pangolin, I will save your question for Aydin for when she comes back.
Hello, I'm back. Sorry.
She's okay. Well, we're going through a few super chats as we go along. Captain Pangolin says, can Aydin do foundations of research on the academic agency? To which I say no, by the way, because I'm currently writing a foundations of research course for the academic agency. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm not going to step in on your what you're already doing, man. Obviously, that would be ridiculous. And I've made videos. If you want to look back into my catalog, I made videos on like basically how to read research. I want to get more into it on my own. Unfortunately, those videos do terribly on YouTube because nobody wants to watch a video on how to do research.
Yeah, I did.
Unless they're specifically looking for that.
I did a video. So, I did a video on. I've done 3 psychology type videos. One was on executive function. One was on the origin of intelligence testing, and the other one was on attachment theory. And
attachment theory is fascinating.
But both the attachment theory one and the executive function one did terribly, and the origin of intelligence testing only did well because I think some school somewhere has picked it up and is now showing it to like 10-year-olds or something for a very basic for like a very basic rundown of where it came from. You know, it's like, oh, Alfred Binet did this, and this comes from there, and that goes there. So,
well, I wish that would be the case for my like how to do research or how to understand research stuff. But
remember,
no, generally, it's only your videos only get picked up. I mean, and I understand why this is the case, but stuff only gets picked up if it's socially relevant. So, like, if you're making something that's timeless, unfortunately, it doesn't actually get picked up because it's like, well, this is too generalized to be interesting to anyone. I try to go through my favorite introduction to research book. That's what my videos were all based on it. I was like, here's the book. Go pick up the book. If you want to learn how to do research, pick up this book. And it didn't work out well, you know.
Remember when I say the video has been picked up, judging by my channel views, etc., they did 12k views. So that's like...
That's good. You got 9k subs, then 12k is a big number. And that means you're doing over your normal, you know, sub base. I will say this: YouTube's either suppressing my channel or doing some kind of chicanery right now with my channel. So doing over your sub count is a big deal.
Yes.
Anytime.
Okay. Yeah. That's also another topic for another time, I think. Otherwise, we won't get through. But yeah, so just do the last few super chats. There's 5 more. Drake Glazer says the signal to noise ratio is off in academia.
Oh.
Yes. Especially recently, probably since the 70s, when they adopted the model of research publish every year, otherwise you lose your job. So it's...
And again, I actually don't think that is the norm.
No.
At least in the social sciences. That is not the norm. The publish every year or be fired. It's publish every year or not get tenure. But once you get tenure, you never have to publish again.
Yeah.
So...
And then they don't. So
exactly. In communication scholars. If you look at and not to toot my own horn too much, but I will, is that if you go and look at the most published communication scholars, you're going to find Dr. I don't know how to name names, but every single one in the top 10 is one of my former advisors, essentially, not direct advisors, people I worked under in communication studies. West Virginia University is the lead in communication studies. I know you might not think, West Virginia, oh, they're a bunch of hicks. No, we're the lead in social science, in the specific subsection of communication.
Okay.
So I did get my graduate degree from the most eminent research institution in the field. But they do it like, here's the interesting thing, right? They don't even pay attention to the studies they do. They just let's just correlate these two variables. And they get published. Because they're very simple correlational level studies. They don't rock any boats. They don't upset anyone. So of course they get published.
Can you imagine how much worse or better it would be if scientists actually got paid for the papers that they got? Like this, like YouTube works. You publish a paper, you get a percentage every time anyone accesses it, right?
Although you might find some more interesting data. But, I'm not trying to disparage those scholars, by the way, who do that. They do it for... I know these people. Dr. Matthew Martin is the most published scholar, I believe, in the last 20 years in communication. He is Winnie the Pooh. That's how he looks. That's how he acts. He's a wonderful, sweet person. He's the most published scholar, and he's just a sweetheart. He does it because that's what maintains his position.
Okay.
And make of that what you. Make of that what you will. That he's publishing.
Yeah,
kind of
an enormous number of.
Not sort of really meaningful data. I mean, they are meaningful. They contribute to the wealth of knowledge, but they're not like revolutionary studies. It's mostly correlational level data.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, given that we talked earlier about how we need to publish null data as well. Isn't it, like the stuff which doesn't rock the boat but just confirms things? It's
yeah, because that's what gets published.
Yeah,
that's what people want, for better or worse, is that they just want these generalizable sort of studies and not revolutionary stuff in its own way. Because if it rocks the boat too much, well, then it's wrong think, right? Then it's the what was that study? The rapid onset gender dysphoria study.
Oh yeah.
And that study was the methods there were bad. Let's be honest.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, they were quite bad. It was based on parental reports of child dysphoria, and that's not... Secondary report is not great.
No.
But at the same time, it's hard to collect primary source report on that too, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because of course the child's not going to tell you the truth.
Yeah,
in terms of from their perspective, well, they've always been trans. The parent may have noticed it, but maybe the child didn't, express this stuff outwardly, and it's almost impossible to delineate what level that's parental perception.
It's also weird because, of course, dysphoria changes so quickly over time with kids, and the vast majority of kids who develop even rapid onset dysphoria just don't end up living with it. They either go on.
Now they also say that you don't need dysphoria. The DSM, the DSMV has now said that you don't need dysphoria to be trans, which makes the entire thing moot.
It's really infuriating.
It is infuriating because we would never, ever, ever, ever say that for anything else within psychology, particularly as it approaches medical stuff.
I mean, don't be so sure. The formulation versus diagnosis debate is ongoing and continues to be ongoing at the moment. So
right, but depression, we can see a measurable effect within the chemical levels in the brain and visualizations within the brain via fMRI. Mm-hmm. However, for whatever reason, we just don't accept any of that when it comes to trans people, which is, again, absurdist. As I said, I find it ridiculous.
We were right. We're gonna have to crack on. But there we go.
Yeah, go back.
So signal to noise.
Luckily, there's a big portion we can skip here. It's a quote. So.
Yeah. Signal to noise ratio is off in academia. Tim Cornish says, paying my OG membership. Don't be bullied by Mr. D. Thank you. Hi, Aydin. Great person for this topic. Thank you for that.
Hello.
Hollow1916 says, chemistry dude here. The research in chemistry is wholly monopolized by journals. Yeah. How can I publish research to keep a job when I can't afford it? And yeah, this means that you are shackled to the institutions which can afford to pay for it at the time. Yeah, 100%. Animation Unlimited says, hey Aydin, why is my Tweets Unlimited account still blocked by you on Twitter?
That guy, whatever, dude. You're not blocked by me under your new account.
So there we go. And
you're fine.
And finally, Adam Morgan says, have your liberalist friend King Crocoduck on. I've not actually talked to Crocoduck, but we've kind of come into contact by degrees at times. So, and he's done a very interesting series on the science wars. Although he's very rare that he uploads, and that's quite interesting. So that's quite good. Right, let's go back to the article in question. Yeah. So the traits that most strongly differ between creative and non-creative scientists are openness and confidence. And using the three-factor model of personality, it's shown scientists score higher in psychoticism with an effect size of 0.45, which I thought was quite funny, and extroversion 0.33. And this difference in...
I think that's actually completely understandable if you've worked around scientists.
100%.
They're very neurotic.
Yeah.
They're extremely neurotic.
And this difference in extroversion is driven by...
Or psychotic, I guess. Yeah.
Dominance. Psychoticism is like... it's...
He explains it. Aggressive, cold, egocentric, impersonal, impulsive, antisocial, unempathetic, creative, and tough-minded. Of course, scientists fall into that category of neuroses, of dark triad stuff.
100%. And it makes sense as well, because in order to push an idea to its limits, you need to be kind of unholily that's not a word, you need to have a kind of unholy obsession with that idea to the exclusion of almost all criticism until it can't be denied, and sometimes that goes places and sometimes it doesn't. So there's a big quote here which basically talks about how people who thrive in competitive environments do better, and
I think you have to be kind of a glutton for pain to want to be an academic.
Yeah, it's a masochistic tendency there, and they're just aloof and pretty asocial. That's all that. To be recognised as a genius as well, this makes sense. A person must think of a new idea, then convince people that their old ideas are wrong. This, by its very nature, is creative, a very non-conformist act, requiring some degree of arrogance and a great deal of persistence. On the whole, consistently telling everyone else that they are wrong. Grammatical error. This is the one I thought that you would pick up.
No, the other one was the sentence that was wrong, but there's a couple grammatical errors. And it's not to shit on Sean Last. It's just that...
No, of course.
It's a blog post.
It's just there you go.
It is an excellent blog post, but it is a blog post nonetheless. We all make these errors.
Indeed.
I am actually not a grammar nor a grammatical Nazi, so I don't give a shit. But sometimes it makes it hard to read.
So there we go. On the whole, consistently telling everyone else that they are wrong and you are right could be described as antisocial. Being comfortable with being antisocial would make this process easier for someone to do. Chat.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the whole thing about sometimes, a lot of the times, when you're working in an academic environment, if you are not willing to say to everyone around you that they're wrong, well then, I'm sorry, but you're not going to make a great deal of scientific progress. And something that he's completely right about here is that something that might be a contributing factor to the idea that we're not making more leaps and bounds in scientific discovery is because there is this weird idea of consensus within academic circles. If you rock the boat too hard, well, there's something wrong with you. I mean, for example,
why can't you just get on?
In my graduate program, I one time said, just once, that I understood socialist ideas. I didn't agree with them, but I understood where they were coming from. Now, this is going to be insane because no one would ever imagine that this is a thing that happened only 4 or 5 years ago within an academic department. But another student in my program put up a laminated American flag next to my desk, put it on the wall, because they thought I was a fucking socialist. Just because I said, oh, I understand where they're coming from. So, and they thought it would, like, upset me, and I was like, oh, cool, an American flag. Yay, I love America. But my point is, every petty, stupid shit that happens in real life, in regular social life, happens in academia to, I would say, an accelerated extent. And that example is extremely unusual because, let's be real, academia is extremely far leftist. And the fact that I said I understood socialism would probably be like a not extreme enough idea in 99.9% of environments. But that upset one other student to that degree, even though I wasn't a socialist. But you know what I mean?
that does amuse me, yeah. Chat is saying, someone in chat says, Kraut wants on, and I just want to nip that in the bud and say, we're talking very specifically about this Rise and Fall of Science article. Kraut is perfectly willing to approach me in his own time, another time, if he wants to have a chat with me, but I won't facilitate him using my channel as an excuse to start drama with Aydin here. So, I think just cracking on with this, not today, but thanks anyway.
No, I mean, like, I'd really prefer not to. If you want, I'm not trying to deplatform anyone. Or
it's not about deplatforming. It's just that it will change the nature of the stream. I don't want that. So
yes, and we know what would happen by that. So it would not be. We wouldn't be trying to objectively come at an article. It would be.
Yeah, he hasn't been here for half of it either. You know, so
I'm a Nazi. I'm a big bad person and that kind of stuff, which is pointless. Subjective opinion stuff.
Okie dokie. So, moving on to the demographic correlates of genius then. Reviews of people who made great scientific contributions suggest they tend to come from the middle class. Religiously, Jews, atheists, and to a lesser extent Protestants are overrepresented, whilst Catholics, Muslims, and Asiatic religions are underrepresented. Jews, atheists, and Protestants share an IQ advantage over neighbouring religions and are relatively non-conformist. Protestants also tend to set up democracies, which is a correlate of scientific progress. We can also see that the vast majority of significant figures were Europeans born after the year 1600. This is even more kind of hyper centralized. So you've got this brown section of the graph, which is Europe. The black is the rest of the West, and then the grey triangle in the bottom corner is everywhere else.
Yeah. This graph is kind of terrifying.
The red pill graph. But even this graph, the vast majority of this come from 3 nations. Britain, Italy, and Greece. And everywhere else is just... Yeah.
Well, that's not very representative.
There's some France, I suppose. In fact, yeah, and it's
Russia, the Soviet Union, in their own way, has made a lot... And I mean also pre-Soviet Union... under Catherine the Great, made incredible scientific progress and social progress. So if you're excluding Russia and other European nations, essentially, or are we putting them into the rest of the West? I'm not sure how generalizable these findings are, and I do take like the graph looks incredibly convincing, but I have issues with Europe versus rest of the West versus everywhere else, and how that's delineated and where the data come from.
No, absolutely. It's but one of the interesting things that I see here in the breakdown, though, is the breakdown by discipline, right? So literature.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Literature, you get a lot of Britain, a little bit of France, and then some Eastern European stuff. Music, heavily German, some Northern Italian, and so on. And then science, almost entirely British.
Britain, almost entirely, yeah.
And then
Scotland actually pretty heavily. Interestingly,
well, Scotland is Scotland, by its population, massively overrepresents in so many different ways. It's unreal.
Yes.
It's like the underrated. As someone who, with a bit more of a meme to them, might say, they are the Jews of Britain. But
well, excuse me, I'm Welsh.
You sound it.
The Welsh are definitely the Jews of Britain, is what I'm saying.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't know. I don't know about that.
And there's absolutely no discoveries in Wales.
I will say.
Look at how missing Wales is here in these graphs. There's not a single discovery in Wales.
I mean, to be fair, you're mainly sheep over there. I also maintain that everywhere that isn't England is Wales. So.
Oh, how rude!
Do you know why? You know why?
Why?
Because the word Welsh literally means foreigner. So translates to foreigner.
True.
Therefore, the entire world is Wales.
All right, let me put it this way then. Okay, so you know the plastic patty term, right?
No.
Of Americans who think they're Irish.
Ah, okay, yeah, okay.
Here's my term for what I am as an American whose families lived in the United States for a couple hundred years and are from Wales, and we can trace back our history specifically to Abergavenny, is I like cardboard Cymru. That's what I like. If it's plastic patty, I like cardboard Cymru.
Oh. Yeah, I'll have to... the Welsh massively overrepresent in the current YouTube space that I exist in. So...
What's wrong with that?
Nothing. I am not a proponent of equality of outcome, so it doesn't really.
Wales will rise again. We're going to secede next.
I'll have to. Like, the academic agent is Welsh. The guy who does yeah, he's Welsh Iranian.
I didn't know he was Welsh.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's why he says heard instead of heard.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But yeah, and then the guy who does my thumbnails, Owine, he's Welsh. One of our chief science guys, Shinobi, is also Welsh. Just they're everywhere. Mr. D, who's the co-host on Unpopular Opinions, he's Welsh. It's infuriating.
You can never get rid of us.
They're everywhere.
It's like a cancer, or like a disease.
All right, like measles on the face of the British Empire, right? So,
a geographic distribution of significant events in technology, mathematics, and medicine from 18 BCE to 1900. I think that's where we are. Table 28.3.
Most of the science done post 1600 was done by Northwestern Europeans, especially the English. This is noteworthy since this was not true of scientific innovation prior to 1600, when it's primarily Italian and some German in there as well. So that's really interesting. And yeah, this graph here, the ancient West, geographic distribution of significant events in science and technology, ancient West, then the Arab world kind of rises to prominence, then Europe just dominates, and then the US comes into existence as a product of the Europe, and
which is a conglomeration of European peoples. So
cracks on. Historically, something around 97% of geniuses have been white.
That's his main statement that I think is going to upset people.
Yeah.
But he's made the argument.
Well, no, I don't think he. I don't think he.
I don't necessarily think he's made it well. By the way, I agree.
Yeah, I just think instantly reject the kind of racial framing of it, because it's like 97% of geniuses have. It's not that they're white, but they've come from these very particular cultures and
I also just disagree with the idea that East Asia is as
barren,
has provided as little as these particular graphs represent.
Yes,
gunpowder is Chinese. You know, I mean, it's not Chinese alone. That's a problem when you try to delineate this stuff, right?
Yeah, of course.
That
I mean,
it's not just Chinese alone. It's a conglomeration and an accumulation of scientific research and discovery that's happened across cultures. And we're talking about a for example, Silk Road era relationship between cultures. Of course, the Chinese would have access to that stuff. So when they come up with gunpowder to make fireworks or whatever, and then eventually make this stuff that fuels muskets, even if it comes from the Chinese first, I think it would have come about no matter what in some culture or another. The fact that East Asia is so lowly represented here, below North America, in his graphical representation, I don't think is correct. I could be wrong, but I think it's incorrect.
I think I would have to go through the full data set again. I haven't read Murray's book, and I didn't pay for it in the run up to this, but I would look. Right, I want to get. I'd like to get into the depths of these figures and see. It's also interesting the cutoffs from what we know. 800 BCE. I hate CE, but common era, that means. But basically, it's still BC.
Because if it's just BC, it implies Christ.
I know, and then we have to acknowledge that Christendom existed.
Oh no.
So
worst thing ever.
Also, and then you get the number of retards who, as a psychologist, people who are historically illiterate who say that BC stands for before Christ, and AD means after death, as opposed to
Anno Domini,
the actual Latin, right?
Seriously, people. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, that's retarded. That is actually, you're right. The word to describe that is retarded.
And when people like that come up to me, I go, so what happened to the 33 years in between in your interpretation? But
it was just the magical period where Jesus existed, I guess. I don't know. Jesus.
Okay. A land out of time.
Illuminate. Jesus fucking Christ, that's stupid.
So yeah. 98% of geniuses have also been men. This is less controversial.
That I 100% believe. In fact, if he doesn't actually have the best data here, because you can find current ongoing data that are relatively recent that will show you that the standard deviation of intelligence between men and women is different. Women have a far larger standard deviation of intelligence. That means that there are far more really stupid women. Excuse me.
Unintelligent.
There are a whole bunch of male geniuses.
Yeah.
There are actually far more really dumb men. Women all kind of fall within this general latitude of sort of intelligent.
Yeah. So
but men are either geniuses or retards, and there's no real in between.
Yeah. The argument is that women. The average woman is smarter than the average man, but men
on average, but that does not in any way account for the genius man. And on average, and let's be real, women are if women can attain the same kind of level of genius as a man, that's extremely unusual and rare. We just don't do that. I mean, even then, when you look at like the number of women who just have access to even competing in the same area, I mean, I would like to see how the data. If I could live 500 years in the future, I would look back at the data from 1998 to present, which would be like 2,500, to see whether or not there was any significant change. And I've picked 1998 as a very particular one because the pill became widely available in 68. And then 30 years is a generation from that. I've written theses on the problem of the pill. It has completely destroyed society in ways that would never have been anticipated by the people who invented it.
Yeah.
because of the way it changes the processing of the luteal phase of the female reproductive cycle. But that's a talk for another time.
Indeed. So that would be an interesting one for me. But like the fact that it's been 98% men prior to then is just expected. If it was anything different to that, it would be a shock. Right.
I mean, you could say that that's just patriarchy, too, by the way.
Yeah.
If that would be the argument you wanted to make, you could make it. You'd be wrong, but whatever. Go ahead and make it.
So, nearly all great figures in science have been white guys. Works of genius also tend to be done between the ages of 30 and 40. There again, a nice correlate there. Interesting that they're this sort of mid to late 30s. The evil part of me did suspect that, historically people married very young, right?
Yeah.
And so if you get married at 18 and you are naturally you have your wedding that year and then you consummate that marriage and you have a child and then your child gets married at 18, how old would you be roughly?
Well, you'd be about 35.
You'd be about 36. You'd be about 36. And when does the peak of all these great inventions and innovations happen? Oh, around 36. It's like if you kick your kids out early, you get to finally stretch your intellect. There you go. No, that's funny.
It also has to do with the way that the brain actually forms. Your brain is not done developing until you're about 28 to 30.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, of course, the time that you would be the best able to come up with creative new ideas is when you're in your mid-30s, when the brain is fully developed, but before it starts to degenerate. And it is a very tiny sort of sliver of time when the brain is both fully developed and not degenerating.
Yeah.
Because you have to understand, like, entropy is a thing that exists all the time, right? So after development stops, entropy sets in. So you're always fighting the clock. So, of course, the mid-30s are the era within where you are fighting against the clock of degeneration of the brain after it's fully finished developing.
I'm going to tell AA that, because he's in his mid-30s now. I'll tell you, you're fighting entropy, man! And he'll love that.
Well, we're all fighting entropy. But he's in his mid-30s, that's the best time.
Yeah.
Because his brain is fully developed, right? So it's not going to get any better. That is the sad part. And I just turned 30, so I'm welcome to the club. But it's not going to get any better from here. It's only going to degenerate from here, and we have to accept that. That's just part of life, I guess. Well.
But it's an interesting, like, they've correlated here Nobel Prize winners and great inventors. I like that they've not just gone with the Nobel Prize winners thing here. So that's pretty good. He says plausibly here...
I don't think we did that today. Current Nobel Prize winners necessarily. This would mean anything.
Let's not talk about Obama, right? But plausibly due to intelligence, right? And plausibly due to what you just said there, the natural development cycle of the brain and human existence, as it were. Mm-hmm. There's a strong tendency for geniuses to have poor or non-existent relationships with their parents, and I found that really interesting.
Fascinating. Yeah, I was very surprised by that. Because
these, as he says here, might tend to be related to the antisocial tendency of geniuses, and also, if you don't have a great relationship with your parents, you have to develop an independent streak, as it were, very early on, and this then characterizes you for the rest of life. So it may actually aid that small conscientiousness variant as well there, where if you didn't develop that kind of self-reliance, you'd also suffer, right?
Yes. Yeah. What I really would like to know, which the data that he presents doesn't explicate fully, is if that relationship is repaired later in life. Because when I also was like, screw you, Mom and Dad, I'm going to school. I'm best friends with my mom and dad now. I talk to them every day, I've seen some other data that shows that people who have a close relationship with their parents tend to be like more well-adjusted and tend to be more intelligent. So I'm wondering if that sort of parental influence thing is a natural part of the evolution of the scientist of wanting to rebel against the status quo to understand some stuff, but it comes back into respecting and wanting to connect with the parents later in life once you've gotten over the rebellious phase.
Which is really interesting because I have had my parents have always been very accepting, and I've always had a very loving relationship with them, and now I'm just perfectly happy to see them 3 times a year and talk to them about that frequently. So
if I didn't talk to my mom like once a week, I'd be so sad. I need my mom in my life.
I don't know.
That might be a woman thing too. I think it might be a woman thing, but I also talk to my dad on about a weekly basis, so I don't know.
I talk to my parents every couple of weeks, but it's more of a kind of a child's obligation just to make sure they're doing all right. Than I love talking to my parents. Which, if any of them are listening, because occasionally they do wander onto the channel, I do love you, Mum and Dad, and I don't feel like I'm forcing myself to talk to you. It's fine.
Well, I think it helps. Like, my parents talk to me about political stuff, so I think that helps. Like, in terms of, we talk about current events, and so
fair enough. My mum is. My mother is uninterested and very bored by such discussion, and my dad had a stroke and is now incapable. So it's a bit.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's an ongoing issue in and of itself. Anyway, right, this is not the feel sorry for not so obvious stream. We'll go back. So explaining the scientific boom. So the model scientific innovator is a non-Catholic white male, smart and creative, with a troubled history with their parents, who thinks in strange ways and gets his best ideas in his 30s, and is a nonconformist. Northwest Europe between the years of 1600 and 1900 was fairly ideal for this. And then he makes an assertion which is the weird one. Like, for one, it was full of white males who weren't Catholics, and I'm going,
Yeah, I had a big heavy think there. I'm not sure about the Catholic thing. I think there is a confounding variable, and this is going to sound racist, but here it is. I don't know when the data that he came up with for the Catholic thing was conducted, but if it was conducted at any point after the 1700s, the reality is that a large majority of Catholics are South American.
I mean, this is Europe.
Is it just applied to Europeans?
This is Northwest Europe.
Okay, those are the data were only from Northwest Europe. I'm not sure to what degree that's necessarily attributable to religion, though. I don't think there's something about. I guess here we have to. Okay, that's the situation, and it was only the Northwest European data that were collected here. I think that we need to. Because by the way, like, what is the most Catholic country in Europe besides Italy? Do you know?
God. You mean aside from the Vatican, which happens to be its own nation in and of itself?
Yes, aside from the Vatican and Italy thereby. It's Poland.
It's Poland, yeah.
So, I don't necessarily buy this Catholic thing. I don't think there's something about Catholicism that implies or produces lower intellectual stuff. I'm not convinced by this argument, I would say.
It's also I'm still unconvinced by the genetic component. The idea that it's just, and I don't like the idea that it's causative. I feel like there were cultural factors that originated in places like Britain in roughly 1600, which were not present before in Britain. But something happened, and we had a kind of scientific revolution where suddenly we started producing loads of science. That's not because we are white, right? So it's just there was a cultural revolution. This particular cultural development happened in the British psyche and in the British, the English specifically, the English mode of being. I think possibly. Some of it is probably reactionary against something the French did, because that's usually what happens with Britain. We don't like what's going on across the channel. And
it also might be reactionary against the King Henry's sort of weird muck-arounds with Protestantism and Catholicism of trying to be more objective as a result. I don't know. I couldn't definitively relate it to that. But the British have had a very, very long history of attempts at being objective that is a cultural phenomenon that I don't think is related to religion necessarily whatsoever.
It's hard to tell. I think you
It
can't.
might be correlated. Correlated, maybe. Possibly.
Well, it's certainly correlated because that's what he's using to draw his thing. But I find it kind of annoying that he's been quite rigorous, fairly rigorous. I mean, although we pulled out a lot of stuff as we've gone along, he's been fairly rigorous up until this point, and then he just makes this kind of assertion with these causative things, which in a causative, I don't even think he's necessarily being causative, but like a causative manner. So,
but
like
I don't know about this claim. I'm skeptical about this claim.
If you throw a load of non-Catholic white males on an island in, the South Pacific, it doesn't instantly mean that island is going to start producing geniuses. I'm sorry, it just that doesn't follow for me. But
so I also guess that my counter argument would be is that where I got my undergraduate degree from was a Jesuit institution, and I know there are weird, like, conspiracy theories about the Jesuits. I don't really care. The reality is, or at least my reality and my experience with going to a Jesuit institution, is that it was hammered into my brain the scientific method more than anything else. One thing that was fantastic about going to that school is that there were these priests that walked around campus, and they were Greek philosophers in terms of the way that they acted on campus.
Yeah.
Where you could go up and be like, "Hey, Father Joe, what do you think about this?" And they would just talk to you about it, and they would debate it with you with no, like, vitriol or anger or anything. They would just be like, "Well, what do you think?" And they'd ask you questions back and forth. I felt like I went to Athens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a certain way, and that was the benefit of going to a Jesuit university, of just having these philosophers walking around campus that you could go ask any question to, and they would debate it with you with no vitriol or anger.
Yeah. I think definitely. I had a bit of that just growing up in the church where I lived, which was quite different to that, but it quite different in the sense of, obviously it's a religious side of things rather than a scientific, but it's just very interesting that being in an environment where people are just open to debate and discussion. It's not even debate, it's discussion.
Yes.
Is just incredibly valuable and will foster in people who are genuinely interested in having discussions, that sort of thing. And you just become also very comfortable approaching people. I attribute a lot of my success at university to just I walked in and I treated my lecturers like adults, and they therefore treated me like an adult instead of like putting them on a pedestal or anything. And I now have some friends there, and but also just this kind of wide network of colleagues and academics who, that they know who I am and I know who they are, and we can get things going, and we'll happily discuss everything. It always makes the Christmas party an interesting experience, It's just apart from last year, didn't exist. So
let's get back into it. Sorry.
Yeah, explaining the science boom. Look at this thing. A bit spurious. Don't make a claim that just because Europe was full of non-Catholic white men.
Non-Catholic.
It's very strange.
I don't necessarily.
So
I don't necessarily think that.
More relevant, I think. The governments and the general cultures were relatively liberal, allowing for strong dissent and innovation, and a culture which emphasised an intense degree of liberal education for upper-class males, giving them a great deal of information to work with by the time they're in their 30s. I certainly think that the kind of nationalisation of education made a big difference, as well as not abolishing the private institutions at the same time. So kind of storied institutions and educators were still able to do things, but it's certainly a thing that we valued education and because that's not like a natural thing, right? If you're educating in a community, or you've got like tradespeople, effectively, if you're a builder in an agricultural society with no formal education, and you're teaching your son building, that's one thing. But then to go from that and say, I'm not just going to teach my son, I'm going to like teach a class of 30 sons how to do that, because I think I've developed a technique which makes building better. Like that, the step from one to the other is quite a jump, and I think it was important that we made that jump.
Yes.
Institutionally, science was also remarkably free. To become a respected scientist, to become a respected science, merely meant.
See, I thought there's some grammatical errors.
Merely meant that you had to produce good work and convince a few others of its value. Scientists were often able to make a living either by being directly paid by students or by convincing financiers. This is important for people with new ideas. They only need to convince a small number of people that they're valuable in order to make a respectable living. With this explanation of scientific...
I don't think necessarily... I don't think we've actually changed from this model, by the way.
Not really.
I think it's the same model. You have to... You want people to pay... Like, you want the state to pay for you. And the only way you're going to be able to obtain that position of the state paying for you is if you have the right opinions. That's how that works now. If you're educating the youth in a way that they find useful, then you can get paid. If it's not useful to them for whatever reason, it could be political, it could be, whatever, then you don't get paid.
Where's this? Yeah. Okay, with this explanation... Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. With this explanation of scientific progress in mind, a partial explanation of decline is immediately made obvious. It simply involves the undoing of every one of these factors which allowed for great scientific achievement in the first place. Again, I think it's a bit spurious to say that these factors that he's particularly picked out are the things which underpinned great scientific achievement. But yeah.
Yeah.
Consider the demographics, because he just goes into this thing here, which is just like amazingly sexist. So, since the 1960s, advanced degrees have been given to women, and with them now making up the majority of degree earners in many fields.
Real.
Sorry?
I don't think that's a sexist statement. I think that's legitimate.
It is, but
I don't think women have deserved most of the degrees they've gotten.
Okay, that's a different thing. The validity of the degree is different to whether or not just giving...
There was a huge push to just make sure that women made up the same degree of or the same amount of people who got degrees as men, and therefore, of course, to make up that gap, you start giving women more degrees. And what do we have right now in academe is that women are the majority in academe.
Yeah,
not men.
About 66%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's... Yeah, okay, no, I agree with you there. It's just, like, thinking about it a little bit more, but it like, on the face of it, just a bit galling to anyone who's not come across that before.
Statement,
yeah, notably, the increase in women's academics may be partly driven by discrimination. Williams and Ceci sent applications to about 2,100 faculty members for academic positions. There was a 2-to-1 bias in favour of women. Yeah, that's very consistent, especially in STEM fields. Consistently there.
Yeah,
and in fact,
psychology. Look at psychology. Then psychology is the only field that prefers men.
Yeah, and I was interested. I was quite surprised to be told this, and it's literally because they have so few practitioners. But also, there's kind of this thing in female-dominated industries as well, that men end up rising to the top of them anyway, even if they're underrepresented. And it was basically explained away that women don't like to do difficult grunt work which is related to maths and numbers. So what would it and also,
well, we already saw an example of that in the stream.
Yeah. very droll, Aydin. But
there's way too many numbers. It's difficult.
But also, it's also about the fact that women don't trust men to be the face of like personalized care and stuff like that in nursing and psychology. So they're like, could you just take the backroom job dealing with all the statistical analysis? And of course, statistical analysis is harder than because statistical analysis is harder than giving out the questionnaires. Then
it'd be nice. Absolutely infuriating to me personally is that I want to take the backroom job and not have to deal with people. There's like a sort of anecdote, I guess. we say in the social sciences that we're just putting people into a room and poking them with a stick and seeing what happens. I don't want to poke anyone with a stick. I want to go back behind the scenes and do the statistical analysis because that's the fun part. But I mean, yeah, women are social. Women are inherently social. That is the normative form of women. So of course they want to like be the conductors of the experiments and not want to do the hard statistical analysis, which is only fun to some weirdos.
And so, of course, the men build their portfolios. I love that you just inadvertently called yourself a weirdo there. So the men end up doing like the difficult grunt work, which is actually in higher demand and better paid. And then because they have the experience that they can just create newer studies, they end up accelerating through this rank structure effectively and the hierarchy, and then ending up at the top. Whereas the women don't necessarily,
No.
which is not to
Women
make any...
are mediocre. In every single field, women end up mediocre. They never are... It's the same thing with IQ. You have men who are extremely high IQ who end up in the highest parts of fields because of their high IQ. Women are mediocre and stay towards the norm, the middle. That's the reality. Unless you're autistic or some kind of weird, extreme variable. That's just the reality.
Unless you run a YouTube channel examining psychological questions.
Unless you're a weirdo external variable. Yeah, pretty much.
Indeed. Right. So, given how... Let me see what we got this. Only 44% of college faculty are white males today. We've also seen... Although, again, like, I really dislike the percentages as well. Because, of course, they're comparative. I would like to see whether or not the quantity of quote-unquote white males has increased or decreased, in terms of hard numbers. Adjusted for population.
Yeah, I don't find that graph useful, by the way.
Yeah, not particularly. In American universities, we've seen an increase in the rate of those damn Catholic professors, although this has been offset by an increase in Jewish professors as well. Oh, no!
He brings up the Jews a whole bunch in this. It's another thing I have an issue with. Is that the fact of the matter is that Jewish people are an extremely small, highly isolated ethnicity and group of people that do have a high IQ in general.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know what the point is in bringing it up, but
I don't know.
If you want to bring up the fact that the Jews are high IQ, that's a reality.
I mean, if it just but the whole concept of ethnicity in general is just so flawed, and there's a reason that historians don't use it, because they chart how language groups have changed over time, right? So what are the dominant languages, and then they kind of group people by that, because it's just a more accurate representation of where culture is spreading, as opposed to that. It's a bit different in the modern day with the way English works, but yeah, it's that's more tried and true than just being like, defining it by the kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Just the colloquial understanding of ethnicity is a bit frustrating. Given how dominant white males have been in the history of scientific genius, it would be extremely difficult to replace them with members of other groups with an equal likelihood of being geniuses. Again, like different social conditions, different genetic templates. I don't think he's presented enough evidence to make this kind of claim. We have not even attempted to do this in a serious fashion, and so it would be surprising if this demographic shift did not lead to a decline in the rate of genius among academics. Again, you haven't talked about whether or not the true numbers of quote-unquote white males have increased or decreased, and so like if there were across the entirety of Britain, over our 500 or so institutions, let's say that there were 10,000 white male academics, and then due to bloating and increasing in things and diversity is our strengthening and all this jazz, suddenly they imported like 10,000 black trans disabled women or something, and they make up the other half, and then you go, well, white males are only 50% of the universities, therefore we have a problem with genius. This is the reason, right. And it's like, but if this number of
it depends on what you put into the equation for what you get in the output, obviously.
So it's just a bit frustrating with that. At
is.
the same time, various lines of evidence suggest that genotypic IQ and phenotypic general intelligence have also declined over the last century. That's really hard to actually map because of the way we keep adjusting our IQ measures. And general intelligence, I'm not familiar with that declining particularly, although
The general intelligence measure is what we generally call IQ.
Although, well, general intelligence, when they say phenotypic, they're talking about G, which is the component measure. But
do you think phenotypic is G? And what is he talking about with general intelligence if phenotypic is G? Yeah, I don't know then. If phenotypic is G, I don't know what general intelligence is.
No, phenotypic is G. Genotypic is the IQ measure itself. So
So
phenotypic is just the coefficient G.
That's hard. It's hard to delineate.
That
would be Russian's work.
Can be. This one as well is interesting because you would presume that the cultures and peoples who produced, the geniuses, etc., have imported a lot of things. We've become a lot more global. So the way in which our populations have changed and the ways in which our cultures have changed and how distinct those cultures actually are. I mean, I don't think anyone would question the fact that the urban spaces in Britain are no longer English, for instance, and are just a set of ethnic enclaves. And if they're ethnic enclaves, then that culture is not being reproduced there, and those are the places where both power and wealth are also concentrated. So it wouldn't surprise me.
It's not just power and wealth. It's systematic regulation. The police in the UK will not go into these primarily Asian, as they would say, areas because they're afraid of getting beaten up. They're afraid of being called out in the news as racist. It doesn't matter if someone's been raped in that neighborhood. They'll say it's our culture, so we're allowed to do it. Essentially, I don't mean in every case, but you understand that's the issue why the cops won't go into these areas, even if it's a serious.
There's also the case of the way exam standards have changed, and I think that's very important.
Yeah.
So there has been a definite decline in there's a huge difference between my parents' O levels and the GCSEs that I took, and to the point now where they're looking back and are trying to. They tried to offset basically the lowering of intelligence by keeping people in school longer. So my sister, for instance, had to stay until she was 18 as opposed to 16, but that did nothing.
Well, in the United States, I don't know how much this is the case in the UK. I've lived here now for 2 years, but I don't know of how much the anticipation is that in the US, if you leave school before 18, you're a wipeout in life. I think in the UK it's a little bit more accepted if you leave at 16.
Well, we used to have school leavers programs, and usually it was let's get you into an apprenticeship as quickly as possible or a trade school, and that would still be seen as school leaving. It's just you're going into trades. And then obviously there's kids who would school leave and then just go straight into retail and never make anything of themselves. But it was more accepted, I think, as well because we had the history with the polytechnics, which were basically trade schools that tried to be universities, and then that didn't work. But it's
we sort of have those in the US, but there's very, very few of them. They're extremely rare, and they are still not considered universities. It's just a trade school, and you're expected to not do anything else with your life if you go to a trade school as a high school student. And I shouldn't go to college, by the way, if you can help it, but that's my opinion.
And
as an extremely educated person.
Remember as well that most people in the UK now enter higher education in some form. So the expectation is that you will end up in education at least until you're 18, probably until you're at least 22. So
there's someone trying to teach in the UK. I'm well aware.
Yeah, the average age for leaving home has changed since my parents' generation, where it was 18, to my generation, where it was 26. So,
wow,
which is mental for like a 40-year period, Okay, that's that.
Right, let's finish.
Yeah, we've only been going for 3.5 hours. It's fine.
We're almost to the end though, so let's get through it.
We are. I do like that the first citation here is Dutton et al., which just amuses me.
Yes, of course it is. Of
course it's Ed Dutton.
Who's alive right now, by the way?
Is he the anthropologist in chief? Bless him. I did an interview with Ed Dutton, and because he talks quite a lot about traits, and he loves to talk about R versus K selection and stuff like that. And I'm going, okay.
I also find RVK fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
and
but we don't.
But he, but I said, okay, so how are you defining X, Y, and Z? I can't remember exactly what we were talking about at the time, and he was like, I think definitions get in the way of action, and I was like, but definitions, dude. We do need. You can't just talk past each other.
You gotta define something what we're talking about. I like Dr. Dutton, by the way.
Yeah, no, the man is autistic as fuck, but he's a good laugh.
I like Dr. Dutton, but that is a problem. If you can't define something, then we can't measure it. That's an issue.
Yeah, but he doesn't.
You have to define something very specifically.
As an anthropologist, he's not great on that anyway. I consider him to be less of a scientist and more of a philosopher in his own way, who uses references. But it's he's all right. So yeah, all of these different findings which indicate a declining intelligence over time, and that sort of thing. Expanding the circle of experts, I think that's what we mentioned earlier. Sending a huge number of people to college, a huge number of people to university, lowering the bar of what's required to be an academic.
It's absolutely at the fucking floor at this point as to what's required to be an academic. If you can just conform enough, you can become a professor. That is what the level is at this point. If you can repeat information, if you can regurgitate information that is given to you, you can get a PhD. And that is not how it should be in my perspective. You have to be an original thinker. That's how doctorates should be earned, but it's not how it works in current practice.
You have to contribute. The fact is, though, if you contribute, I mean, I don't care because it's just my personality. I don't care. But so we were talking about eating disorders in one of the lectures, and they said, can you posit? And what they want to hear. They want to hear the stock response of the media is making women starve themselves, and airbrushing is evil. And I was going, I've lived in Kenya for a little while. So I was going, what could be causing eating disorders in the West? And I was like, free time and access to mirrors. That was That was the two things. I was like,
access to mirrors, access to the capacity to care about such a thing.
Exactly.
How about that?
Access to the ability to care about such a thing, an entire industry designed to promote it, and then the free time to obsess. And I was just like, does that not sound like a thing? But the intake of breath in the room from my 99% female class and then
it's a basic Maslow's hierarchy argument. Jesus.
And then the next person, after I'd given my answer, was like, well, I just want to say that I disagree completely with what Mark's just said, but also this, and then gave their thing. And I was like, why did you feel the need to qualify that you disagreed with me in this, as opposed to, because she was doing a follow-on point.
Presentation. It's about presentation of the right opinions, not about having an actual well-thought-out opinion. And that is truly the cancer that's eaten all of academia. Is that it's become about presentation. It's just academia. It's spread out into the general cultural gestalt, which is that it's not just you have to present the right opinions, not just to get your grade now, but to be able to exist on social media or in any kind of capacity in social reality.
Yeah,
you have to present the right opinion like you're going to get a goddamn grade. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely. So,
sorry.
No, of course. I just thought, the rise of conformist science is a huge issue. It is very easy to get this. I remember sitting there, and it's things like, whilst I appreciate that psychology is not a particularly maths-heavy subject, and in order to do statistical analyses, we have tools which will allow you to do such things, as long as you understand what it's giving you. Whilst you won't be the greatest data scientist or whatever, you should be able to run like a basic ANOVA or a regression without too much difficulty.
If you can't do an ANOVA regression, you need to have your PhD stripped. But okay.
Yeah, no, I know.
I think you're right there.
No, but it's not about them not. But
my really brief caveat is that psychology is not completely retarded. That's my only caveat.
No.
These people do know how to do basic statistical analyses. As you said, ANOVAs and regressions. If they couldn't do that, it'd be out. Sorry, go ahead.
But it's just, you should have a basic level of understanding of mathematics. You should be able to do bid mass, for instance, right? In order to do things. So the question came up: how are we going to calculate our final year grades? And I said, well, it's very simple. We have one module which is worth 30 points. Every other module is worth 15. There are 6 of those modules, and 2 of them are discounted. If because the lowest scoring ones are discounted. So you get 4 modules and your final year project, which are worth 80% of your grade. So what do? You add up all of the scores that you got from those 4 modules, which were, you discount the 2 lowest ones. You add up all the 4 scores of those. You add your project grade twice because it's worth twice as much. You divide by the number of module credits, which in this case is 6. And then you times that number by 0.8 because it's worth 80% of your grade. And then you add that to your score from second year. And the number of people who could not follow this, even when it was written down, was shocking. And really shocking.
It's giving them a big advantage, by the way, that breakdown.
Yeah. But
it's giving them a decent advantage.
But this is just something which you should be able to do in your head. Like, automatically.
Incomprehensible people couldn't do that in their head, even after I fucked up doing basic math earlier. What the fuck?
Yeah. And these are people... And some of these people are scoring, very highly on technical modules, and I don't know how they are. Because they go, well, you've got a remarkably good grasp of maths for a social science student, Mark. And I said... and I was like, the last time I got a compliment like that, it was from an illiterate Kenyan man who was running a school and making a massive profit, and he was overcharging his students, and I basically took him to the balls to the wall and told him, you're charging them this much, you're only costing this much, you're only going to charge them this much, or I'll pull 47 kids out of school. So... I
mean, to be fair, I got that. Go ahead, sorry.
No, and so he was like, "Are you a mathematician?" And there was fear in his eyes, and I got the same reaction from this colleague of mine in this other student when I was going through undergrad.
Oh,
and I'm like, "Oh, for goodness sake, I just."
What a scary to be a mathematician, a scary white man with his numbers.
Oh yes, that's my white maths coming in,
It was actually quite funny though. I had something of a similar situation. Like I know I embarrassed myself for accepting that, but when I started doing advanced statistical analyses, like doing like log linear regressions and stuff, which is not a complicated analysis. Yeah. When I started doing that, the professor was like, "Wow, you really picked this up," and I really struggled. All my life, I struggled with math until I got to doctoral level math, and it was up until that point that I struggled with it. And I think that a lot of people in the chat and anywhere listening, if you struggle with basic math, maybe the problem is because your teacher was shit, and you might have a much better time with advanced math, because advanced math, you're not dealing with... I think they dumb stuff down to a point where it actually makes it impossible for intelligent people to understand it. I'm not even calling myself intelligent.
No, that's...
If you're thinking on a level above what they're talking about, you can't understand what the hell...
Yeah. I mean, my first year undergrad was exactly like this, where they dumbed everything pre-T-test down so much so that it made no sense whatsoever. And then later on, when you were given the summary in third year for advanced statistics, I was given the summary of all the things that you needed to know, etc. And I was like, oh god, that makes so much more sense when it's just put concisely and easily, right? Like, there's no...
Exactly.
Okay, let's get through the last little bit here then. So the final speculation I want to offer is that science has been made worse by the fact that educated people today regard the official scientific community as the sole source of scientific knowledge. Knowledge produced by others is disregarded because of who it was produced by. Yeah, the kind of appeal to authority is a big deal, I think.
when you understand how incestuous the scientific community is, this should be abandoned as a concept. It is incestuous. I know that you'll be like, oh, it's blind peer review. It's not blind peer review the way that you understand it. The scientist who is reading your paper knows you because you are within a very, very small field, and he or she can recognize your writing and can recognize what you're studying. So no matter how double blind you want your peer review to be, it is not.
No, I agree. That's what we're out there. In conclusion, then, while we cannot be certain, the evidence suggests that scientific productivity has declined. We can agree on this. Even less certainly, I don't think this can be explained merely by saying scientific problems are becoming harder. I think, that's an unsatisfactory explanation as well, although we've come up with a few. Maybe you in the chat have come up with a few yourselves. I think it's a really interesting talking point. I think it's likely that demographic and institutional changes in both general and within the scientific community have significantly contributed to this decline. And I think yes, but I think for different reasons than Sean here has laid out often. So hopefully it's been an enjoyable 3.5 hours.
Very sorry for the increased length.
Well, if you hadn't gone for your pee break in the middle, obviously this would have been 3 hours 25.
I know, it would have been 10 whole minutes less.
10 whole minutes less. We do have one final super chat that's come in. Animation Unlimited says, I have to disagree with you on bisexuality being half gay. Bisexuality is not half gay. It is equal opportunity love. Also, I thought the brain stopped developing at age 25. Interesting anecdote on that one, actually. Not the bisexuality thing. The brain development thing is something which scientists go back and forth on. Again, there is no real consensus. They used to say 22, and now they say closer to 31, basically. And it varies a little bit in between. So one of the biggest reasons for this is primarily to do with, I think, real-world experience. So it's to do with the number of novel situations you're actually exposed to. So because the age at which you leave home has become later and later, as I say, it's 26 on average now, then you end up with the novel experiences of entering the real world and having to be responsible for yourself and those challenges later. And it's actually all tied up with a lot of stuff relating to the length of education that we have, a new concept called quarter life crisis, which is, I wrote a paper on that last year. Fascinating topic. I might do a video on that at some point now that I'm in the psychological mood. But and that's all that. So it's the brain when quote unquote the brain stops and starts developing is a bit woolly still.
It's also a bit of a misnomer. Your brain develops forever until you die. So
you are always, as long as it's just that your brain peaks its hippocampal neurogenesis at some point, and that's another topic.
When people say stuff like your brain stops developing, they don't mean it literally stops and dies. They mean that's the peak of development, and that is an academic shorthand for the saying that I should be more specific when I say stuff like that. It can be misinterpreted, and everything I say can be misinterpreted, trust me, by like, oh, that was some kind of estrophobic, whatever. But yeah, the brain is a fascinating organ. It does not ever actually stop. It just, in terms of when it is more prone towards growth and when it's more prone towards degeneration. Those are like the two kind of phases we could categorize it into.
Indeed. All right then, I think we're going to wrap up there then. But thank you ever so much to everyone in the chat for coming by and enjoying the discussion. Please leave lots of lovely comments and like the stream if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you're new. And thank you ever so much to Aydin for coming. I mean, I've been trying to get this done with you for a couple of weeks now, and it's all just sort of finally come to fruition, and it's been lovely having you on.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. This was a really fun document to go over.
Yeah, if I find something else, I'm sure we'll have you back. And yeah, until next time. Have you got anything to shill whilst you're here?
No, except for if you're not subscribed, check out Aydin Paladin at YouTube. I do 50 to an hour-long videos on social science stuff. So check it out.
And there we go. Whereas I have obviously my weekly podcast runs on a Monday evening, Fake Accents Unite, where we talk about current events and also just general chit chat with myself and my co-host, the Britisher, and whichever guests we happen to have on. Hoping to get some interesting guests on as well. Not that we aren't interesting by ourselves in the near future as well. Sargon and so on. And so we'll see you then. Thank you everyone, and have a great week. Take care.
Bye-bye.